Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Firstly, I'd like to ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out housekeeping notices regarding how this meeting will be managed.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note that this meeting of the Corporate and Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chairman in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the surface car park at the front of the building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on laptops. Thank you.
Item 1, apologies. I'll ask the clerk if there are any apologies.
So we've had apologies from Councillors Hazel Allen and Roberto Rocca.
And substitute members?
Substitute members, Councillor Sean Gabriel is here for Councillor Allen and Councillor David Kelsey is here for Councillor Rocca.
Thank you. Do any councillors have any disposable pecuniary interests or any other interests on any items on the agenda? Yes, Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I actually have 3. So they all relate to agenda item 9. I'm currently employed by Bournemouth Food Bank, and Food Bank's mentioned. I also voluntarily coordinate 2 community bridges, Branksome and Rossmore, and I am the chair of the management committee. And both of those organisations are members of the Access to Food Forum, which is also mentioned, and the paper also talks about Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service. So I need to declare I'm a member of the Dorset Fire and Rescue Fire Authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others? Yes. Yeah, would you like to put your microphone on and do it?
Sorry, yes. I'm also a member of the Fire Authority.
Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. The committee is asked to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of June, 20th of July, and resumed on September the 2nd, and the meeting of September the 2nd. I'd like to move an amendment first to the first paragraph, clause 24 of 20th of July minutes. The committee member highlighted that there were no report available for consideration. There was therefore little which could be discussed around this issue. The committee member moved that the meeting be adjourned. The motion was duly seconded. I'd need the seconder for that, if I may, please. Councillor Kelsey, do you accept that as a true record? The amendment, please show. Okay. Right, thank you. Yeah. And we need to please confirm the minutes of the other meetings mentioned. No objections. I'll take that as read. Right, moving on to agenda 5, public issues. I'd like to invite Mr. Alex McKinstry to the table to ask his public questions.
Okay, good evening.
Good evening.
Let's press on with question 1, Councillor Williams. Yes. Okay, so the draft minutes of the 20th of July meeting, item 4 on tonight's agenda, will have been dealt with by now, but did contain inaccuracies. At paragraph 24, the chair, on introducing the Beach Hut item, did not mention the lack of a report, or that no report was going to July's cabinet, nor did he say there was little to discuss. In truth, he immediately took a point from Councillor Kelsey, who proposed adjourning. The lack of a report was only mentioned later, and July's cabinet wasn't mentioned at all. How did these significant inaccuracies end up in the draft minutes?
Thank you. I'll answer the question. The committee has noted the points raised by Mr McKinstry, which were a result of an inaccuracy in the minutes of the meeting held on July the 20th, and this has been addressed by an amendment to those minutes agreed tonight under the item 4 on the agenda, confirmation of minutes. Thank you. Would you like to ask your second question?
My second question was disallowed, Chairman. It was about assets. Shall I press on with 3?
Your next question.
Okay. So this again relates to assets. Were future places involved at any point in the drawing up of the list of assets that appends item 7? If so, what was the scope of their work? How much are they likely to be paid? And what will be the source of any such fee?
Thank you. The Chief Executive will answer that question.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'm answering on behalf of the Leader of the Council, Councillor Drew Miller, and the answer is no.
Thank you for your questions. Daniel Parkin, if you wouldn't mind.
Am I allowed to amend my question slightly, bearing in mind Philip Broadhead's announcement today? No. Okay.
Sorry, as you wrote.
Okay, fine. Okay, so I appreciate that assets listed in agenda item 7 are to be sold, are listed as confidential in the appendix, need to be confidential for commercial reasons. However, as we have seen, there appears to be a lack of confidence and trust within the current leadership. Please could you therefore confirm how these assets would be sold, i.e. auction, open or closed bids, or via an estate agent sale, and who will oversee the sale to ensure fair value has been paid and not handed to any local property developers at below market value and not available to anyone else to participate in the purchase?
Chief Executive will answer that.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, answering on behalf of Councillor Miller, the Leader of the Council. As is established practice, our professional estates officers will be overseeing the sale of any assets to achieve best values, and a mixture of sale methods will be used. For information, all disposals above £500,000 in value are decisions for full council as per our constitution. So more information will be available as part of that full council process.
Am I allowed to come back to that at all?
No.
No, I'm not allowed to come back to that. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
That brings to end the public issues. That takes us now to item 6, seasonal response review for 2022. Councillor Beverly Dunlop is online. Sorry,
I am.
Yeah, can you just wait one, please?
Sorry,
Yes.
can I just ask before that, what news is this that Mr Parker was referring to in reference to Councillor Broadhead?
I think it was a tweet, Councillor Addison's just showing me, I think it was a tweet or a social media announcement, but it was a statement rather than an announcement.
About what?
Yeah, really, we can discuss this under the relevant agenda item when we get to it. The budget, yes. Yes, Councillor Miller.
Can I ask whoever, is Councillor Miller intending to be here this evening? For which item, and do you know when, please?
Yeah, yes, I do, about 6:45.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Dunlop, if you'd like to proceed.
No problem, Chairman. Thank you. What I'm going to do, with your permission, is a brief introduction, and then I will hand over to Kelly Ansell, who's Director of Communities and SRI for the programme, who will provide a short summary of the key highlights. We also have a number of lead officers with us this evening, and they'll be able to answer those detailed questions that relate to their specific areas. Who we have, I believe we have on the call, we have Andrew Brown, Seafront Manager, Ian Poultney, Head of Strategic Development Environment, Rob Pickenell, Parking Services Manager, Nick Phillips, Sustainable Travel Operations Team Leader, and Ananka Randall, Head of Safer Communities. As well as myself, Chairman, we also have Councillor Bobby Dove and Councillor Mike Green. Councillor Anderson can't be with us. As most of you know, he recently lost his mum, former Councillor Sue Anderson, and her funeral's on Friday, and he has relatives from various parts of the world at the moment, so he's not able to be here. I'm sure everyone will understand. So moving on, we're obviously all aware that our region benefits from outstanding beaches and beautiful open spaces, which residents and visitors enjoy throughout the year. And during the summer, our tourism economy is boosted from being a very busy resort area with increased visitor numbers, especially to the beaches in hot weather. These high visitor days do make demands on our services, but it's worth saying that tourism is worth 1.1 billion to the local economy. That's businesses, livelihoods, and 18,000 jobs. In addition, income from our seafront not only pays for BCP's entire tourism and culture budgets, but he also sends several £1 million in surplus back to the centre that pays for other services. So while some may think at times the high visitor days are a bit of a headache, it's worth putting it into context just how important visitor economy is to this region and of course the council. There's always been summer congestion and challenges from dealing with hundreds of thousands of extra bodies, but the legacy councils manage these high demands well. However, in 2020, during COVID and the relaxation of the lockdown rules, I think Bournemouth in particular experienced a spike in day visitors, most people will recall, and the hotels were still closed, so it presented a number of challenges. And some of these visitors, I think it's fair to say, brought some pretty awful behaviours with them, which presented some sort of new encounters. So in order to provide effective management going forward, core services were allocated additional funding and benefited from an overall coordination through the seasonal response programme introduced by the current administration for 2021 and 2022. And this report outlines the excellent delivery of this programme over the summer, which has supported a busy and successful season. And if I may, Chairman, I'd now like to hand over to Kelly Ansell, who will go into further detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Kelly. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Can I just check?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So good evening, members. I'm really pleased to be able to present this report to you this evening. It reflects a further successful summer seasonal response and a lot of great work across many council departments. As Councillor Dunlop has already said, the report sets out the activity throughout the summer season. It notes our key successes and also considers our challenges. So to just very briefly summarise, seasonal response as a programme delivers an intelligence-based, coordinated approach that supports the management of seasonal peaks in addition to our business as usual arrangements around resort management. Our model is based on a tactical plan which brings services and partners together, and it uses data to predict when peak periods will take place and allows us to coordinate and set our response accordingly. So this year, £1.69 million was allocated to enhance core services and to allow the continuation of our multi-agency command centre, which supports the scaling up and coordination of relevant resources, and a command structure to also support that to manage the response overall. So agencies such as Dorset Police, RNLI, Coast Guard, Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue, as well as lots of different key leads across council directorates and services have worked together to deliver the seasonal response plan, which ran this year from the 9th of April, so Easter, until the 4th of September, when it closed following the Air Festival. And the multi-agency command hub went live from the 27th of May and ran all the way through to the end of that period. So in contrast to the summer 2021 season, this summer provided us with plenty of sustained good weather. We saw really high peak temperatures, higher than we'd seen in previous years, and we also, of course, had 2 declared heat waves. And whilst our visitor numbers remained high, there was an overall reduction in visitors to the seafront between May and August. But despite that, there were still really significant visitor peaks that took place in line with the good weather. And during those periods, the peak numbers were comparable to the highest levels that we've seen previously. So with that in mind, the seasonal response is there to understand when those peaks are likely to take place and to manage them. And with that, alongside our strong baseline resort management, we were able to manage the season with no major issues or incidents. Our key successes, as outlined in the report, include increased parking enforcement. We addressed traffic congestion and poor parking through the use of temporary traffic restriction orders. We had traffic CSAS working with us, community safety accredited scheme officers working to keep traffic networks moving at really busy times. Visible security presence working alongside the police and our own CSAS officers really helped to provide additional safety and comfort to visitors and was a deterrent against poor behaviour from that visible patrolling that we saw. We did see significant reductions when compared to previous years in crime and antisocial behaviour this summer. We had well-managed beach cleansing and waste clearance, which wasn't always easy in respect of the amount of litter left on particularly busy days. And we had security patrols working overnight and then into the morning to support our seafront and park rangers to deal with overnight camping on beaches and also in open spaces. Our beach check app this year included real-time car park capacity information, which is a really helpful tool for planning for people who were coming to the area. And as I mentioned earlier, the MAC ran all the way through to coordinate all of that activity. It would be fair to say that no summer season is without its challenges, and this year peak demand periods presented us with some issues that ultimately benefited from that overall coordination of the response through the MAC and from the enhancement of the services that was allocated. Our response, as it was last year, focuses on an approach of being agile, working collaboratively, and being very decisive in responding to issues as they arise. We've done a review of the summer activity, and we've done some detailed work to consider the challenges. We have some actions that are being pursued to support the future delivery of seasonal resort management, and we have a development plan that's noted in the report for completion over winter 22 to support delivery next year. Overall, the delivery has been a substantial success. We've seen improvements in the maintenance of our environment, safety of residents and visitors. The response itself really enables us to efficiently respond to those peak demand periods, and where required and where the council is able to, and our police as enforcement power partners provided additional enforcement activity alongside all of that as well. We've had lots and lots of positive feedback on how safe the resort felt and how well coordinated public resources were. And we've continued to see lots of interest from other local authorities and other agencies who've visited us during our busy periods, come down to the MAC to see what's happening and to understand the approach, which continues to be considered as best practice. I think that personally, my personal view is that the work of all of the BCP officers that work so hard across the summer season is to be commended. The demands of a successful resort, particularly during those peak periods, are considerable and can often be provide for a pretty intense working environment. But the joint working, the efficiency of the response, and the genuine passion for working together to deliver a successful season, I think is evident in the results that you can see in the report. And I think it's something that we should be very proud of. As Councillor Dunlop's already mentioned, we have a number of colleagues here from different departments to be able to answer any questions. Thank you for your time, and I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Members of the committee, do you have questions? Councillor Hedges, followed by Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chair. If I can be a bit greedy and possibly go for two questions. On point 39 on page 32, it mentions specifically, I'm referring to overnight
stays in motorhomes and caravans without permission from the council. I was on a task and finish working party in 2016, and for 6 months we found ourselves in most circumstances unable to enforce or modify inconvenient or nuisance behaviour of vehicles in situations like this. And one of the reasons stated was because we had height restrictors on a lot of our car parks, these larger vehicles couldn't get in. So that's just something I'd like to put forward on the record to see how far we've researched solving that problem, considering that was 6 years ago. But now with BCP, obviously we will be seeking solutions, I'm sure. Point 48, it's on page 35, mentions the multi-agency control centre, the MAC, which I think is what I've seen in the presentation is hugely impressive, and obviously officers are assuring us that it's a vital tool now and really, really useful. The point 48 says that the MAC was deemed successful. I'd be assured that there was a police endorsement that they agreed with that point as well. Could the officers assure me that the police were more than happy with all the work we were doing?
Kelly?
Yeah, happy to answer that. And when we did the review, we've gone out to all of our stakeholders and our partners for feedback. We've done that this year and last year. The police are very supportive. They provide resource to the MAC, the work in terms of the planning, the collaboration and the coordination of resources is very much sort of helpful across the response in general, and something that everybody involved has generally over both years been very pleased with. So the answer is yes, Councillor Hedges.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson. Thank you.
Councillor Kelsey is next.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think firstly it has to be a big thank you to Kelly and the team for the work that took place over the summer period. I'm fortunate or unfortunate enough, whichever way you look at it, to live on the East Cliff and was inundated with many of the problems that do arrive. And I have to say it was very easy for me to contact different officers when necessary to get any minor problems sorted out. The obvious one on the East Cliff was the parking, but as soon as the TTTRO was put in place, that reduced drastically. I was just wondering, with the money that is left over, the 400,000, whatever it is there any plans to use that to put in some permanent measures to stop that happening again, i.e. around the large greens on the East Cliff, opposite the 3 hotels, where cars seem to think it's a free-for-all to park? Can we not put some boulders around to prevent that from happening in the future? It's a complaint I get week after week after week throughout every summer. And also where we had the cones put along the road, they were great. I have to say, I'm not complaining about them whatsoever. They were really good, really helpful. But is there not a permanent solution where we could have ones fixed into the ground at some way that maybe could be removed in the winter months and just slotted back into place during the summer months, so we don't have to keep relying on traffic management to come around and keep putting the cones back in place? But apart from those slight grumbles, I think the team did a great job over the summer period. It was busy. There was a lot of hard work put in. Our cleansing teams were frantically working away every time I walked along the cliff tops. So from my own personal point of view, a huge thank you to them for the work they did.
Who'd like to answer that question?
Shall I, Chairman?
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Yeah, I think I absolutely go along with what Councillor Kelsey is saying there. I think it was a superb team effort to be able to restrict the problems, and we have to accept that there will always be some problems. You will eventually reach not just capacity or overcapacity, but extreme overcapacity. And at that stage, something will happen. It's like one of those toys where you squeeze one end and something else is going to pop up somewhere else. So But I think the fact that we did manage to keep those problems down so successfully for so much of the time this season is something that we should be very, very pleased about. And actually, one of the things that I think I'd like to point out particularly is around the deterrent that's come from, whether it's been from putting a TTRO in, putting cones up, or making sure that we have tow trucks in a very, very visible situation at the beginning of the day, so that people coming in think, oops, no, maybe I'm not going to risk it that way. It doesn't necessarily translate into the numbers that are towed away, but what it does is it deters sufficient for a long period of time. There are still bits and pieces that need to be done. In particular, I note that there are some car parks that, despite it being on the beach app, despite it being pushed again and again and again, despite CSAS officers sometimes directing people to there, we still had car parks which are quite close to the seafront, which were not full at the same time as people are over parking in places that they shouldn't be. I do like the idea that Councillor Kells has come about with looking to see whether there are more permanent solutions. I think it may be very difficult to do that with the sort of pop-up cones type thing. I don't think we're going to get there on that, but the idea of being able to boulder off some of the green spaces is certainly something that I think should be explored as we go forward. The other thing, and it is mentioned in the report, is the level of parking fine, which does make it, for particularly if a group of 4 or 5 come down, when they think, well, it's going to be £7 each for us to park wherever we want during the day. It is awful. There should be the deterrent coming from tow away at the moment, and I suppose I'm watching the screen eagerly to find out who's going to be the Ministers of Transport, because it is something I spoke just after the summer with the current member of with current minister responsible about the level of parking fines, an idea that I've got. She was supportive. She then moved off in the Liz Truss reshuffle. I then met earlier this month with the current, well, as of up to an hour ago or whatever, Minister of Transport, who is again interested in the idea that I'm bringing forward, but I'll find out very soon, no doubt, whether she's still in post and whether that's something I should be following up, or whether I need to start again with somebody else.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Bartlett, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I too would like to offer my congratulations to Kelly's team, and it seems we are improving each year with the team learning from experience. I was particularly pleased to see the improvement in the take-up of the Park and Ride scheme this year, which I think is good, and we've learned from that, obviously, in terms of which park and rides we're going to be using in the future. The question I've got relates to the overnight camping on the beach. And it was interesting to read in the report that the enforcement team can't actually take action against somebody if the tent is either not done up or people are asleep, one or the other. And that prevents an enforcement action. So it sounds like it's almost impossible to take an enforcement action, actually. And one of the potential solutions is the introduction of a PSPO, which is being examined, I see. The question I've got is, what difference would that make to this particular situation? You know, because if the legal requirement is, you can't enforce it, it's someone's asleep or the tent's not done up, what difference will it make by implementing a PSPO in that particular scenario?
Kelly.
Thank you. Camping issue is a frustrating one. It is difficult to enforce against, and for the reasons that you've noted, Councillor Bartlett. The way that the enforcement works at the moment is that we rely on our bylaws to be able to conduct that enforcement, and that it's all down to how that is worded. but it's also there are limitations in terms of the fact that prosecution happens in slow time. So a PSPO, a Public Spaces Protection Order, provided there is enough evidence, and we've conducted a robust public consultation around that and a number of other aspects that you'll see noted in the report, would allow us to be much more prescriptive around the behaviour that we want to restrict and prohibit. And it would mean that fixed penalty notices could be served on the spot, instead of, at the moment, the process works on the basis of an eviction notice and then prosecution in slower time through the courts. So it's a far more expedient enforcement measure, and it would allow us to, if we were to proceed with that, to have much clearer wording that would be far more effective in terms of enforcement.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Iyengar, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you all, Beverly, Cabinet colleagues, and just our officers as well. Congrats, and I think the report is good. I think there's a good honesty as well through the report, which I think is welcome for a scrutiny committee like this. I'll just pick on a few things, if I may race through a few points, and then just maybe at the end ask a general question, which is, starting with Beverly, any comment or any sort of reaction to anything that I'm saying, if I can put it that way, please. I'm looking particularly going down to, in fact, the conclusion and future considerations. So I think the end of the report, that's a very good table in there. And again, back to this word honesty, I think there's some openness here about going forward, where there's still some lessons to be learned, and in fact to take the performance in this area even higher still. And I think that would be most welcome. So in no particular order, on the illegal parking, it's been mentioned, just absolute continue that lobby on the PCNs, and I suspect we're not the only council in that boat. The deterrent effect needs to be stronger, and where we can get a fine, we need the money, to say the least. On the next one is the alternative car parks. The Beach Check app, it's not stopped being something which is still, kind of innovative, maybe not when it was first launched, but it's something with room to grow. And not just to expand the content, but to make it even stronger and more meaningful for visitors to come. It's still, in a sense, not unique, but it's still something quite special and something which can be a differentiator still for this area. The tailway has been mentioned. Absolutely agree with you, Mike, about the presence and the deterrent effect there. On the litter on the beaches, the next one, it does say there's something coming to Cabinet in November 22. I'm quizzical whether, are we seeing in this report here what's intended to go to Cabinet in November on the litter side of things? Just hold that for a minute. I'd like an answer to that, please. More generally on the litter, we know it's a difficult thing, but once again, residents ask quite reasonably, why is it other places, other resorts around the world, and I know people can be selective about this, but why is it other places can somehow manage to sort this out, and yet, maybe like many other resorts in the UK, we've still got the most horrendous problem with it. What is it that some other places are doing, whether it's communications, strong language, some deterrent of some sort, even the threat of a fine, even if we can't actually do it. What is it that they're doing? And we need to still be pushing hard on that. Final couple of things. One is toilets. It's mentioned in page 29, but it's left a bit open-ended, if I may, as to going forward, what were some of the key lessons learned from that? And going forward, what is kind of new and improved? Welcome for something on that, please. Beverly, something on mobile home vacationing strategy. We've talked about this in the past, I know, but there is a kind of a very welcome side to the whole, caravanning mobile home visitor economy. And there's something there which should be on a long plan, I suspect, to take forward. And the last thing is the technology around the missing children, the wrist bracelets and something like that. Obviously, it's something where we should be tapping the government to see whether there's some money for that, to do something which is taking it the next step forward, piloting something, and to see once again whether we can sort of enhance our credentials in that area. So many points there under a general, this has been very, very good, but very, very keen to see how we can continue to lift the bar on this. Thank you.
Who'd like to answer those questions? Mr. Dunlop? Councillor Green, you've got your hand up.
I was just going to answer on a couple of the transport ones, but maybe Bev or somebody would like to go forward first on the others, on the main stuff.
I'm not.
Yes, I can. Sorry about that. I've got too many widgets on my table. Right, yeah. I think that the litter one's quite interesting. Part of me is inclined to say, well, if you go to Spain, they walk along the seafront carrying big guns, so that might have something to do with it. It is a difficult one, and I think I mentioned earlier that we do seem to have a new cohort of visitors, and some of their behaviours isn't what we're used to. The difficulty is actually spotting. I think it's in the base, spotting people do it. I think perhaps, and I'm not wishing to dump this across, but I think it might be helpful if Andrew came in and talked through exactly how they're handling at the moment and what their difficulties might be on that one. You mentioned with the bracelet for the children. I think we're doing pretty well on that, actually. We're successfully pairing up missing children, in fact missing vulnerable adults, really well. And I think just on the Beach Check app, there was several things that came forward this summer about that particular app, some potential amendments, but we are sharing it. I think that's something we have to remember. We're sharing it now with other resorts, and some of the things that we might want to do with that, we would have to talk to other authorities about making those changes. I think it's also fair to say that there is, with everything that we do, the signs that we put up, there are some people who are determined to go as close to the seafront as they possibly can, and they will go through 3 or 4 signs that tell them that car park is full, this car park is full, because everybody thinks they're going to arrive as somebody else is coming out. I think Councillor Green would probably want to expand on that. I think Councillor Dove would like to come in as well on the littering, if that's okay with you, Chairman.
Yes, of course. Should we take Councillor Dove next?
Good evening and thank you very much. So yes, the littering aspect of our response to it is coming forward in a paper that's coming to Cabinet, and I think it's also been called to one of the committees under the WISE paper, so we're extending the remit of fly tipping, fly posting and also littering, and it's proposed that we'll be going out to try and find some contractors who will lead on that. We've had some offers already come in about how that will be determined, and in particular it'll be particularly working on the seafront during the summer and other high demand areas. It's been challenging because seafront are so busy on the seafront doing seafront stuff that they haven't perhaps been able to focus particularly on the littering, which means it has to be seen and dealt with there and then. And of course, we've also got the issues of being able to require name and addresses for summons, etc. So that will be some support that's coming in the WISE paper. I think it's November, late November time when you'll see that paper and the consultation that we're requesting that we can carry out to do that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I need to mention, and perhaps Kelly will step in and assist me if I've forgotten anything around that. Thank you.
Councillor Green, do you want to come on in now?
Yeah, sure. Just on a couple of those items that Councillor Iyengar mentioned. The first is on camper vans, and actually that also was referred to by Councillor Hedges in his first question. I think Councillor Iyengar is right that there is a potential market, I think we all recognise, for a decent offer on motorhomes. It does require us to identify 1 or 2 sites which would be suitable, and certainly when we looked at it in Bournemouth that became a little bit more contentious. But I also wonder whether if we did that, it would allow us to be a bit harsher on the problem parking of motorhomes where people are doing so without permission. In many of the places, in fact in almost all of BCP, it is not illegal to park a motorhome. It's not illegal to remain in a vehicle overnight or to sleep in the vehicle. There are some historic signs, particularly in Christchurch and in Poole, which are non-enforceable about overnight sleeping. However, I think this is something which is already being, well, it is already being looked at as far as the TROs that would be required to accomplish it. But I do feel that there is an opportunity to both give and receive on it, where we are ensuring that we are taking out the problem, but making sure that people have got an alternative if they want to come and they want to participate and they want to spend money, frankly, when they come in with their motorhomes. The answer on, by the way, to Councillor Hedges is absolutely right about the height barriers that were put in the car parks, which does exclude most motorhomes coming in very deliberately because of the risk of encampments, of illegal encampments, and that is something which it made a very considerable difference once those height barriers came in reducing the number of illegal encampments that we had. The other one was you mentioned again about Councillor Iyengar mentioned again about the level of parking fines, which I referred to earlier. And actually, what I didn't do is to give you what my pitch to the minister is, and that it's a slightly subtle one, because we've got to remember that the reason that the parking fines are as low as they are is because there are local authorities around the country who have used parking as a cash cow in order to raise revenue, to either plug gaps or to increase spending. And it was decided, rightly or wrongly, some years ago by the government that was not a suitable use of parking revenue. And that's why there have been a lot of extra restrictions, including the use of the camera car, for example, which we can now only do outside schools. It would be far easier to enforce if Eric Pickles hadn't taken away the opportunity to be able to do so. So we've got this debate, if you like, between those that feel that the parking fine, like we do, that the parking fines are not sufficient deterrent, and those that feel that they need to ensure that local authorities don't try to exploit that for revenue purposes. And so what my pitch is that there are areas which can be designated around the country, and I've offered Bournemouth Seafront as a pilot scheme, wherein those fines would be considerably higher. However, the local authority would only be entitled to keep the current level of fine. So if at the moment it's £70 discounted by 50% if people pay within a fortnight, and that's why people can get away with £35, push that up to £170. But we as the local authority would only get to keep the £35. The balance on this would go to a government fund, which could be used in various ways, potentially around improvements to parking, or in whichever way that the DFT felt that sort of fund could be put into place. So that, so that everyone knows, is my pitch. That is what I'm going to continue to push to the new minister, whoever it is, because I think it gets round the perceived problem that local authorities are taking advantage of it, at the same time as giving us what we really want, which is for a true deterrent.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Allison, have you a question? Councillor Iyengar.
I didn't hear anything. Can I just on the toilets? I did have something about the toilets because there was no response. So I didn't recall
I missed that. I'm sorry.
Commenting on that. I think it is of a lot of interest. It only has a very small mention in here.
Yeah.
What were the key lessons learned and going forward about toilet provision?
Sorry, Councillor Allison. We'll come back to you in a moment. Councillor Dunlop, do you suggest Kelly Ansell will answer that question?
Hello, sorry, Kelly, or is Andrew Brown? We're talking about the seafront toilets, Councillor Iyengar.
I suppose predominantly the seafront, but whatever was in the remit of summer response, the whole sort of portfolio of the toilets.
Okay, Kelly, are you able to take that one, or Andrew?
I think it would be better for Andrew to take it if that's possible. Thank you.
Yeah.
There. Yeah, there you are. Okay.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Yeah, toilets. So I think in terms of there's a couple of sort of layers to this. One, I think significantly there is some investment taking place over the course of this winter for summer 2023 to improve and invest in 5 of the seafront 30 or so toilet blocks. I think the other lesson for us is making sure that we can maintain the physical structure of those toilets to allow our cleansing team to maintain as high a level of cleaning as possible across as long a time period as possible over each of the days over the course of the summer. We have a reasonably large toilet provision across the seafront, and there will always be, as with all of the resources on the seafront, pinch points where just simply, even if we had double the resource, we'd still have huge challenges sort of dealing with the numbers of visitors. But for the most part, our facilities over the course of this summer were clean, well managed, and probably met the demands for the vast majority of our beach users.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Ike?
Thank you. I may come back to something, but I should give way to others. Thank you very much.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first of all also put on the record my support for all of the staff. I've been on both sides of the table on this subject during my time on the council, and in my experience, I've met quite a lot of seafront staff, and they all work incredibly hard to deliver a really, really good service. So that's my first point. I just wanted to get some clarification on one thing. So there's a section here about the missing children, the kids zone, and the tracking bracelets. There was a scheme previously that was at least partly funded by LD when I was portfolio holder. The report says that the plan is to investigate the potential for its implementation, and the answer from Councillor Dunlop previously in this meeting seemed to indicate that the scheme is going well. So does the scheme exist, and is it going well, or are we implementing it in the future? Because it's not really clear from the report what the case is for that.
Councillor Dunlop, are you able to help on this?
Right, Chairman. This is the tracking chip. This is the tracking chip. You're talking about the scheme exists. Is that what your question is? The scheme exists and it's going really well, the kids zone, but you're talking about the potential to include a tracking chip.
Yeah, so the scheme previously exists. It was funded by LV. They gave out the wristbands for free to parents to keep track of their children on the beach. But the report says that we're looking to investigate the potential for its implementation of a kids zone wristband. So we're not, are we? Because it already exists. We're already doing it. We've been doing it for a number of years.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, we don't have that tracking chip at the moment.
Your previous answer less than 5 minutes ago was we've done really well at tracking children and the chips. It's going really well.
No. I said we've done. No, I do beg your pardon. Now I know why I'm thinking you're asking me a different question. No, what I was saying was that we do really well in terms of pairing up lost vulnerable people and lost children. We've been quite successful. So I am sorry, I didn't mean to mislead you. I meant in tracking children and tracking vulnerable people and reunited them with their loved ones. In terms of the chip, I think is Nananka coming in on what's happening with that? Are you?
I'm quite happy to come in. Yes. So the kids zone has been implementing the wristband for parents that voluntarily. So when they come down to the beachfront, they're given a wristband with the details on. So if the child does go missing, it's easier to reunite them, as it were. But what the proposal is to actually look into using a chip within those wristbands to actually help geographically locate those children that get lost as we move forward. So when you do a marathon, you can track people on that marathon or the course via GPS, and we were looking at the possibility of implementing that within the wristbands for the kids zone. That's what that's about. So it's not there yet, but we're looking into it.
You're puzzled, Councillor Allison.
I am puzzled. So the wristbands that we use to track the children on the beach in the zone that already exists, if they
the wristbands don't track children. No. They are just literally a wristband that they write their name and address on.
Okay, so it's just a label that indicates.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Sorry, that was my use of the simile tracking as people tracking down lost children. I understand now why you're confused. I do beg your pardon.
Right, I was confused, but now I understand. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, again, I echo the comments of other councillors about the well prepared report and all the work actually that was done during the summer season. I could go on and ask numerous questions, but I'll stick to one. On paragraph 44, you talk about the antisocial behaviour under the pier or adjacent to the pier, which is a challenge because there's inadequate CCTV, etc., etc. Obviously, I can't come up with the technical solution. Obviously, the solution will cost money. As we can find money from SIL for barbecues and aviaries, would it be, and this will be a question perhaps for one of the officers, would SIL monies be a suitable source of money to sort out this particular problem under and adjacent to the pier? Thank you.
Is that Kelly answer?
Yeah, I can answer that. Just to give some reassurance, there is very good coverage across CCTV, obviously with CCTV of the seafront, but there of course there are some blind spots, and the nature of the pier as a structure do present some difficulties in that respect. From a SIL perspective, what we would need to consider, of course, is the ongoing running costs and any revenue costs of that investment, and that I think would be a challenge in terms of the use of SIL for that purpose. But of course, you know, we're constantly reviewing our CCTV accessibility, and I think you know that any financing that we can look at around that it would be considered. There are lots of other measures that we've discussed in terms of using a sort of Harris fencing around the pier. That really is our hotspot area that we tend to have issues in. And one of the things that worked well this year was location of police vehicles down at the seafront during peak periods. I don't think it's just about CCTV. I think it's actually about a range of different measures, and working with our partners to make sure that we've got the most effective response.
Thank you.
Just a small point coming back. Obviously, there's ongoing costs in maintaining the electric barbecues, so you know it cuts both ways. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I'd just like to bring up the point about the maintenance of the, not necessarily the maintenance, but procurement of barbecues under SIL funding. Because my understanding of SIL funding is that it shouldn't attract any ongoing expenditure. Now, I've witnessed the barbecues at Boscombe Pier, for example, and there are 15 of them located to the left-hand side of Boscombe Pier. And there are 2 beach staff members cleaning them all day long in the summer. And that's just to the left-hand side. Now, if that isn't ongoing revenue expenditure, I don't know what is. So I just wanted to make the point, you know, that SIL money is not supposed to attract ongoing revenue expenditure. It clearly is in this instance. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dunlop, do you want to comment?
Councillor Dove has her hand up, Chairman.
Oh, I beg your pardon, I can't see it. Councillor Dove.
Yeah, I think there's been some recent developments in terms of what can be considered within a SIL application, and that I think, and I would have to check, I know Councillor Kelly's in the room with yourself, so I'm sure she'll shout if I've got this wrong, but I have a feeling that I've heard somewhere that revenue costs can now be considered, and I thank Marcus Andrews for his very pertinent and helpful suggestion, and certainly is something that we'll take up and review, so thank you.
Question.
Thank you. Can I just make a request? And it's nothing that needs sort of a whatever amendment or something. The report is good, but I would please ask after this meeting, a section is added to this table, which is in the conclusion and future considerations, which is headed toilet provision, and something which is taken from the paragraph 29 and then the looking forward view, just like the rest of this table is. It can't be left out of here. Something so important and of public interest as toilets, and the summer may have gone well according to the report,
but there's got to be a looking forward view, which is how do we make enough provision or continued sufficient provision, but also, Andrew, to your point, sort of then bringing that flexibility in as needed for when we have the peak and then we have the off peak, and keeping it all cost controlled as well, because we know it's a very high cost item. And there's something here that must reflect a kind of a strategic kind of forward view about that. Thank you.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Dunlop? You're muted at the moment.
Beg your pardon. What probably hasn't been mentioned is the fact that extra provision was brought in where needed. There were temporary additional toilets brought into areas where there was high demand, and where there was excessive use. There was an issue with one of the lavatories, so additional toilets were brought in place. So there is that backup provision to bring that in. And as Mr. Brown has said, there is a programme of refurbishment. If you look at the visitor survey, and certainly in terms of the seafront strategy, in every location, the number one, and Councillor Anger is right to mention it, the thing at the top of everybody's list is the quality of the lavatories. Everybody wants to go somewhere and have a clean lavatory, so it is recognised. The importance of it is recognised. We are bringing temporary ones in as a backup, and I think Councillor Anger makes a very fair point that perhaps we should mention it in this how we're the capture of what we're going to be going forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a little one. I just wondered, because it's not actually mentioned as such, but the disposable barbecues can be a real problem on the beach where people bury them and then people walk over them. Also, when we have very dry weather, if they're doing them anywhere near the cliff tops, we have fire outbreaks and that. So are you going to actually mention in your PCS, whatever it is, ESPO, that disposable barbecues will be banned? Because I understand the whole idea of having the electric barbecues was that it would reduce this. And actually, I think that barbecues themselves are actually banned on the beach till 6 o'clock, but we still hear stories of problems with them.
Councillor Duff.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Edwards, and you raise a really good point, and that is part of the consultation process that we will undergo. So it's going to be a far-reaching PSPO, which hopefully ties up all of the gaps that we've seen and been unable to resolve over the last couple of summers. So that would include the campings and the fires on cliff tops, which provide the obvious dangers that we've seen a couple of times this summer. It would include the overnight sleeping. And one of the things that we will go to consultation is how people feel about having disposable barbecues on the beach front, which in themselves aren't dangerous, but it's the fact that they're so hot they then can't be disposed of, and that's when they get buried and people get burnt. So it is really broad reaching. It's not just the coastal areas, it's all open areas, and that will certainly be one of the things that we'll be going to consultation on, and seeing what the public appetite is for that. But there's an obvious safety implication that we need to be aware of, so would certainly be supportive of not having the disposable barbecues if possible on our beaches.
Thank you. I think we've probably exhausted the subject. The recommendation is that we note and we have commented on the contents of the report. So pretty satisfied that we now move on. See no dissent, so we'll move on to item 7, which is the medium-term financial plan. I've got to make an announcement to introduce the item and remind members that whilst we try and keep as much of the meeting as possible open to the public, there is an appendix to this report which contains exempt information, and members are asked to ensure that any questions do not stray into non-public discussions. If a member wishes to ask a question on the detail within the exempt appendix, they should advise me in advance, please, and we'll go below the line. So having said that, I'd like to welcome the Leader of the Council, who's the portfolio holder for Transformation and Finance, to present the item. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. And so we're now seeing this report. It's the third time we've seen this report since the early September meeting. Really pleased to report that it's taking much more positive shape, and there's been a really huge amount of what I consider excellent work by my cabinet colleagues and the CMB team as well. So thank you everybody for that's moved it forward. Just to take a brief step back, Chair, just remind us of why we're doing these reports effectively. So since the budget in February, we've obviously had the Putin's war in Ukraine and the ensuing cost of living pressure. That's put £55 million, around about £55 million worth of pressure into our budget in the 2 years. So around about £25 million this year, and around about £30 million in terms of the 23-24 budget. So that left us a budget gap of £36 million at the start of September when we were looking at 23-24. We saw a report at the near the end of September which would move that budget gap down to 16 million, and this is the latest iteration of that process, which has shown how we can get to a balanced budget for the 23-24 period. That's also in the context of we've now moved from a significant overspend with that 25 million of in-year pressure to we're currently projecting a 7.8 million pound surplus in year as well, Chair. So again that's positive. We are in a really strong position nationally in terms of, if you look at some of our comparator authorities, and any upper tier authorities are both struggling in year and also in terms of their longer term, medium term financial periods. We're really fortunate that we've inherited this crisis at a point when we've already successfully delivered over £50 million of local government reorganisation savings. Would be very difficult if we hadn't done that. And in terms of our position going forward, of having an £11 million budget gap over 4 years, that's largely and importantly worth noting around our further transformation savings of in the region of £50 million. So we've hit this crisis and off the back of the COVID crisis in a strong position because of the work that's already been done in terms of merging these authorities. A key point, and I did flag it briefly when we met this time for the last report, we're now looking to move away from a capitalisation direction to looking at how we can use more traditional flexible use of capital receipts to fund our key transformation expenditure. So that is now actually the basis that this has been modelled on, and we've had discussions and continued discussions with DLUC on that. But we have asked that if we would look forward to the governance review, and that's something that is ongoing, will be ongoing, and we thought would be really useful discipline for us to work through. And also what that will mean, Chair, is if at the end of the year we don't hit every capital receipt that we're looking to make from non-traditional from traditional sources, then it remains open to us the possibility to ask government for a capitalisation direction of any gap there. So it's actually doing what we said we'd do when we sat down and spoke to government. We're trying to look how we could fund transformation from our own off our own bat, as it were, and we now have some degree of confidence that we're able to do that. So, Chair, just in summary, dramatically move forward. We are in a very strong and stable position compared to other upper tier local authorities. We now will look to improve our situation between now and January, when the full budget will be announced. And I'm very happy to take any questions. And Chair, apologies for not being in the room. I'm on holiday this week, but wanted to be here to present this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bartlett, I believe you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, it's good to hear the leader say that we are moving away from a capitalisation directive, and I certainly would support that. So thank you for that. So the thing I'd like to do is to make an apology. It's unusual, probably, but I'd like to apologise to Adam Richins, because back in February, when he was giving us all the warnings about the need to manage the budget on traditional means, I actually voted for the budget, and I regret that decision, so I apologise for that. In mitigation, I say I really was left with a choice of one. There was no alternative budget offered, and in the need to make a balanced budget, I supported the budget. Unfortunately, as we now know, looking back, we've run into problems, some big problems. we not gone that direction, we would have not been put in front of the public eye in the way that we had over the last few months. But anyway, just go on now to the paper. The first question I've got is about the, I think it's on table 1, it's about £6.7 million worth of staff costs apportioned to transformation. And the question I've got on that is are these, well, roughly how many people are we talking about? I assume it's probably about 70. Are those extra people, or are those people that we would otherwise have made redundant had we not had transformation? So that's my first question. The second question relates to the, I think it's table 3, and it talks about the savings, £42.6 million worth of savings, which is quoted as 16% of our net revenue expenditure. Now, given that we've now in cost escalation mode, this surely is a really, really ambitious target. And this is on top of £10 million required from the transformation programme. Now, it's just such a big figure. And given that since LGR, when we had shared services, so we started to squeeze the lemon, we've been squeezing it ever since, how many drops of lemon juice is left in that lemon to get out? You know, surely we are at the point where this ambition here, it's just not realistic. Now, so I'm sorry, Leader, but I'm going to have to ask you, you know, the confidence you have in that, what underpins this assumption or forecast that we can make £42.6 million worth of savings in next year's budget. And on top of that, I noticed that children's and adults transformation savings are included in that line. And I'd be interested to know what percentage of that figure is allocated to that element of the transformation programme. Chair, I do have 2 more questions. One of them relates to the confidential annex, which I realise I can't ask at the moment. But I guess I can probably ask this one. It's a very quick one. And given the risks that we've got and the financial situation that we're in, would it not be prudent to suspend the future places operations? I'm not saying cancel them, suspend them, pro tem, until such times that we have got confidence, one in particular, about the sale of the assets, because we don't know if we can achieve that, you know, between now and March, for sure. And even subsequent to that, given the conditions the market are in at the moment, you know, it's really is a big risk. That is one area where we have money that we don't need to spend, and I understand it really chips into the ambition of the administration. But, you know, we are in a very, very difficult situation. So would it not be prudent to suspend those operations temporarily until our finances are back on a sound footing, and we've got our services, we've got a transformation in place, and then we can move forward with regeneration ambitions a little bit later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for mentioning you want to ask an exempt question, because we'll go below the line when everybody's exhausted questions. So if you can store any you have to the end of this section, that would be very helpful. Sorry, Leader, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the questions. I'll start in reverse, actually, if I may, in terms of the questions about regeneration. You know, absolutely not. I just you know, as much as I do always respect your critique, Councillor Bartlett, I completely disagree with you in this instance. A couple of reasons. One, it doesn't actually affect how we're funding transformation. Doesn't remotely affect our medium-term financial plan, because effectively the way that's being funded is through capitalising the project. So you know, it wouldn't actually improve our financial situation by stopping that spending. 2, we are in a really strong, you know, one of the strongest positions that I'm aware of being reported across any upper tier local government authority. So we are in a strong financial and a sustainable financial position. There are some things we need to, you know, be aware of. We've inherited a small amount of reserves. We have the high needs block work that needs to be funded still. But you know, outside of that context, appendix, we are, in surplus full year, and we are looking at a modest £11 million funding gap over your balanced budget for next year, and a £11 million funding gap over the next 4 years. You also to ask about, well, until we've guaranteed the sales of the assets. Well, we do also have a minded to letter from the minister. In relation to capitalisation, if we should need to use that as well. And I think I think it's a really key and important point to make. You talk about the administration's ambitions, but it's also about the place's ambitions, and we've had long and detailed conversations historically about where Bournemouth was in under the Unity Alliance, and what was happening in and around Bournemouth. And at Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole, we should have a high level of ambition for our place, and actually doing regeneration properly. We're hearing Homes England are talking about our operation being an exemplar operation. We just recruited Lord Bob Kerslake, effectively the eminent lead across regeneration in the country. We are doing important things across regeneration because we have ambition for our place. And I've often said that it's actually how we use our assets, a £3 billion worth of assets and GDV projects that we've got to deliver a long-term and sustainable financial council. This is the point we've made historically. Let's not sell off all of our assets just to balance the books. Let's make sure we invest in them so the place becomes even more amazing than it is, but also our assets have even greater value. So I do positively and politely completely disagree with you. In terms of your other questions, you asked about the £6.7 million worth of transformation staff savings. So no, they aren't people we would have been making redundant. They're people in our core organisation who, a lot of the work across this organisation is around transformation. It's how we're transitioning into a modern world-class authority. And what we wanted to do was to reflect the fact that a lot of our staff across the organisation spend a lot of their days, working to move across transformation. So it's just capitalising some of that cost, and that 6.7 million, I'm pretty sure hasn't changed since the February budget. So it's not something we've tried to, put more money into then to solve a problem at all. It's just that's a reflection of a cost that we and our auditors and Deluxe, thought was relevant in terms of our transformation program. There was another question, Chair, and I've done the third one and the first one, but I've forgotten the second one. So perhaps Councillor Bartlett could come back and remind me of the question I've forgotten to answer.
Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, it was about the confidence in the £42.6 million savings.
Yeah, high degree of confidence, because we haven't started a lot of that yet. We've got effectively, so we've already saved over £50 million, which was in the February report, which is great. So in terms of local government reorganisation, what we wanted to do is to completely opposite to what was the approach that we inherited, was not to take any cost out of the organisation in terms of staff now. The £15 million of smart structure savings, the staff cost savings that were in the MTFP we inherited. We wanted to do those savings after we've effectively done the work in terms of systems. So most of the savings that are due for next year around procurement, savings around 10 million, and then it's the year after that the majority of the staff of the FTE savings will be coming in. We've strong track record of delivery. We've delivered over £50 million. Both previous administrations and previous councils have been a part of delivering that. That has been delivered, and now we're in a strong place to deliver the rest of the savings. You do make a good point in terms of the effectively around procurement. There's a lot of cost escalating in the organisation because of inflation, but that means there's more of a target to effectively make those. So it's a lesser percentage of savings we'll be looking to make because of the fact that the organisation has grown and the cost base is growing. So we're confident. One of the main reasons why we're keeping one of the recommendation around trying to stop expenditure in year and make sure that has to go through formal process, because if we believe the fact that if we can make sure the organisation is completely aware of where it's spending money, there are absolute controls we can put through in terms of procurement. It will be a challenge. We know that. That's why we're making it. It's front and centre of every budget we do when we're talking about the savings we've got to make. But effectively, we've got a transformation programme. We've delivered £50 million already. We think there's another £15 million we can deliver, and have a high degree of confidence we will deliver it.
Chair, just one point. Part of the question I did ask that hasn't been answered if you don't mind.
Yeah,
and that was the amount of savings coming from adults and children's transformation, which is included in the scheduled service-based savings line of the 27.8 million. You know, how much of that is savings in adults and children's transformation program?
You know, I'm just trying to bring that table up now. So if you know, Adam Richards might have a clear answer to that. Would you say it was figure 3, Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're doing two things. We're effectively, you know, saving £43 million across the organisation through transformation. We've also put in place a cap, a 2.99% cap, in terms of adults and children's services, which we're trying to drive the organisation to. And I know I believe that's in the line underneath that. While I get that up, actually, Chair, it might be better if we ask Adam Richards to come in on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to highlight with regards to the savings that are scheduled as part of the proposal to balance the 23-24 budget, at least £12.2 million of that relates to adults and children's services.
Thank you, Chair. And just one last comment. My understanding is that Future Places is funded from reserves, and that you know, if you didn't need it for Future Places, there would be £7 or £8 million left in reserves as a contingency.
No need to answer, right? Okay. Councillor Iyengar, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got maybe 3 questions. Shall I ask them all together or one in turn?
No, one after the other.
One at a time. Okay, thank you. Hi, Drew. Just at the start of this, in the narrative, right, sort of the top of all of this, understand the logic, which is basically the closure has been identified, and then there's something here around, and now it's kind of with officers at the most senior level to sort of then look at the deliverability, the feasibility of this. And I think it's worth just staying on that for a minute, because this is quite an important pivot that we're at. I get the feeling from this that the box has been ticked with the ministry by giving a piece of paper to them saying, here's the identification of a number of things that close the gap. Okay, in my language, close the gap. Okay, but in a sense, that piece of paper says nothing about, is that doable or not? And one might say we don't need to do that job with the ministry. That's the job done there. But now we've got to look at it and say, can this actually be done? And for instance, you know, if, for instance, something in my personal life required me an assumption to get a job that earns £1 million a year, it could be there on a bit of paper, but it's not going to happen. And just there's something here where I will ask a question on this, Drew, because I'm very keen, you know, your view on it, and if appropriate, the chief executive as well, is in terms of that pass of the rugby ball, where is that? Just tell us a bit more about that, and what is the feeling around the doability of this in the current fiscal year?
Before we go back to the leader, I think Adam wanted to come in.
Yeah, Chair, I think it was in response to the funding of BCP Future Places, in the sense that we are not funding from our reserves. We're funding the £8 million working capital loan by way of loaning the money through our treasury management function, if you like. What will happen is BCP Future Places will put forward business cases to council, and if council approve those business cases, then actually we will make them payment based on that successful, and therefore, you know, that means that they don't need that £8 million loan. The loan they've taken, it could be repaid, if you like, as part of that process. It only becomes a problem if they spend £8 million and council does not accept any of the business cases that they put forward, in which case the council would need to then fund that £8 million because it would be a revenue cost on council. And in those circumstances, you know, clearly, I think as identified in the report, it would be a drain on our reserves at that point.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Mellor, over to you now.
a drain on reserves or an in-year pressure, which we'd have to look at in any other way. We look at MTFP in-year pressures. But thank you for that clarity. Yeah, no, I think Mohan's actually, Councillor Wenger, sorry, is absolutely right to spend some time focusing on this. What we've done is a really intense period, and a really useful period of time with Cabinet and CMB to look for ways that we can, look to move towards a balanced budget for next year. But now there's a period of time where that level of detail really needs to come in and talk about deliverability. So we have done a significant amount of work, and every with Cabinet and CMB, and to actually work out what actually goes forward and what we want to work up into more detail. So it's about at what point do we get further into it. That point is now effectively, it's about these are traditional means. So in terms of the point about can we magic up a formula or £1 million a year job or whatever the analogy was, there is. I do ask you to have confidence, and I think you can take some from whether that's our chief exec or Section 151 in terms of the fact that we are looking at traditional means to balance the budget. So and it's about the confidence levels of both corporate directors, service directors, cabinet colleagues, and more formally our Section 151 officer, in terms of having the confidence that those are deliverable. We believe they are. Actually, I'll go further than that. I think what we've done is we've tried to display to government and to ourselves, from a prudent position, how we can actually present a balanced budget for next year. There are a number of things that aren't, we could have put a lot of assumptions in that we haven't put in. So there are no assumptions for government support. It's frankly, if you're looking at some of the deficits both in year and for 23-24 across local government, it's frankly unfathomable that government won't offer some element of support. We ask clearly, and we'll continue to ask with the old and new Secretary of State for Levelling Up, that support is forthcoming. We've got further work we're looking at in terms of our vacancies. We've got further work in terms of our health conversations effectively. So that we haven't, again, could have modelled in and haven't done it. And there's a number of other work streams. So there is a high degree of confidence that these are deliverable. We now need in that phase, and you'd have done this many times, Councillor Wenger, work up the detail between now and January. We expect the macro position to improve. I've given some of the examples of that, and we expect now to work out what the deliverability is. It's when you kick down further into some of that, you actually are aware of become more aware of some problems or opportunities in those. We're in that process. It's a very normal budget setting cycle where we're actually working through that. But you're right to raise it. Now the focus does become in terms of deliverability.
Are you going to come back?
So what I'll do is I'll go to my next question. I think there's probably something here which I imagine other committee members may want to pick up on. But thank you, Councillor Ella. So there's more to come. This is an ongoing discussion then as the feasibility sort of unfolds. So there's much more to talk about on this. The second one, which I think is on a similar point, is probably just the next level down in detail. And again, I'm just on the front page of the report. That's where I'll stay for much of this, really, is that we have an appendix about the disposal. I'm not going to get into the detail of any of that. It's to challenge the presumption that we won't be using the capitalisation direction. And I just want to challenge that, and maybe there's something I need to learn here. Because it has a huge consequence, of course, doesn't it? By not using or planning to use the 20 million that the government is offering, we're forcing ourselves to make 20 million of savings. And it may be straightforward to make those savings, but I think the discussion already is probably unearthing the fact that it's going to be very difficult. If, for instance, the thing I need to learn is by taking the 20 million, we immediately are relegated to a further level as a council, and that has a consequence, and we don't want that consequence, I would then understand why we're not doing it. But if there isn't such a thing, it seems to me, has there been due consideration of gratefully accepting that money and therefore relieving ourselves of, in a sense, 20 million less gap that needs to be achieved? Because this gap closure is going to be horribly, horribly painful for a lot of people, I imagine. And just as a final thing on that is that we're not discussing this with all the things on the table at the same moment. We've talked about future places, and I must challenge Councillor Melly, sort of a defence of future places right now is fine, and you were very, very sort of strongly, you know, defensive of future places, but compared to what? Compared to the prospect, for instance, of having to cut back bins to fortnightly, for instance, or stripping of sweets. We don't have those choices in front of us at the same time right now to know which is the right one going forward if this committee is asked for a view. So I'll come back up to the top. Can I have a view, please, about should we go for the capitalisation direction or not? And what was the thinking behind that? And can you give reassurance that we're actually not making decisions in some kind of chronological way, really? Rather, we're looking at everything on the table and we're making the best considered decision. Thank you. Sorry, that was rather long, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Anger. I think it's worth just teasing, and apologies, I didn't put it in my introduction. I had done in previously, but the capitalisation direction is a capital piece, which is around the funding of our transformation costs. Whereas when you're talking about savings, that is a more specific, medium-term financial plan. That's a revenue piece, because of the fact that we won't be taking or looking to not take the capitalisation direction doesn't have a direct impact in terms of our MTFP, which is the service base of the revenue piece. What it does do is say we'll be looking to do some sales of assets, of some non-strategic assets, rather than savings. So I think it's a really clear and important distinction to talk about. That there is a real discussion to be had around capitalisation direction, and I think there are there is a school of thought that say if we were to take it, it's currently the exceptional financial support mechanism. What the case we were making to government in the early part of the summer, a number of secretaries of state ago, was around we should authorities who do formal transformation, proper local government reorganisation, should have there will be a cost to that. There will be a cost, a transformation cost of becoming efficient, to investing in systems, and we are, my view and our view was that we should not be forced to sell assets to deliver that. We should be allowed to borrow for that. That is something, that discussion we were having earlier in the summer is something that is different than the exceptional financial support mechanism, which is effectively where we have a minded to decisions. So I think there is something in terms of saying, are there consequences? Is it good for this organisation to take a capitalisation direction? And my view is, if we don't have to, we shouldn't do that. I think also it's the right message to be making to government, isn't it? Well, certainly is from my perspective. Let us, if you're not going to give us a completely fresh new way of funding local government reorganisation through borrowing that effectively was there pre 2010, then it's on our responsibility to try and get to as clear a position ourselves in terms of how we can fund it, so we don't need exceptional financial support. So I think it's reasonable to look for ways of funding it ourselves, and I do think but there are potential consequences. And I can't remember if it was you, Councillor Anger or Councillor Bartlett, but talked about some of the less positive national press that this summer has generated. Then it's our responsibility to move forward in a more positive light. I come back to, we're actually in a really strong financial position. We're in one of the best in year and then 4-year medium term financial positions of anybody I've seen in terms of upper tier authority. So I do challenge the narrative that it is particularly difficult. It's difficult because of a huge, cost of living pressure, £55 million over 2 years. But and this is where I come back to future places. We have such an opportunity to develop our assets, to make the most out of them, to be commercial with them, to also deliver a really great economy and vibrant place for our communities going forward. But to lose sight of that now would be completely short-sighted. You talk a bit about the detail in terms of a budget, and those sort of more binary decisions. In what context do we want to spend our money? We will see that. We will see that in the January report for the full budget. We're having again. I think we're having our third budget cafe. In early December. So where members across the council will start to see more of that detail. So there's a time and a place to see that. It's perfectly normal, formalised, process to do that. And I look forward to bringing some more of that forward in terms of, what that shapes up like.
Mr. Richards, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just really maybe just to add a little bit of detail to the leader's answer with regards to, what we're looking at this year is a level of transformation which is revenue expenditure. So we have revenue expenditure and how we fund that revenue expenditure. We have two choices in front of us. One of that is a capitalisation direction, where the government allow us to do a very unusual thing, which is borrow to fund revenue expenditure. Okay, that's one option. The other option is to, through the flexible use of capital receipts, is to sell our council's assets and utilise that to fund that expenditure, because under the flexible use of capital receipts, you can use those disposal values to fund revenue expenditure. Again, you can't normally, but under the special guidance and statutory guidance, you're allowed to do it in those sort of circumstances. So from the council's perspective, it had those two alternatives, and it has to weigh up the pros and cons of both, in the sense that there is slight subtle differences with regards to what can be, you can use what revenue expenditure you can fund via capitalisation direction, and what revenue expenditure you can fund via under the flexible use of capital receipts. There are subtle differences, and we're going to have to play those out and consider those as part of the process. The other thing we're going to have to consider is, I think as the leader alluded to, is that if we borrow, that borrowing has to be repaid. It has to be repaid over 20 years, and we have to incur interest on that debt, and that has to be repaid over 20 years. So that's on the one side. On the other side of the coin is obviously if we sell assets, we have to consider what those assets are currently being used for. And if they're currently generating an income for the council, then clearly we will lose that into the future. So you have to play all of those against each other, plus that overall strategic context that the leader referred to.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Councillor Edwards now.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got three quick questions. The one on the financial outturn, it says where there's no new finance commitments. I just wondered about other projects that had already been approved of. Are they still going to go ahead, or are they going to be binned? Sort of including the homeless hub, the Folkestone station lifts, and the fibre optic cable project. And then my second one is on the harmonisation of services, and I just wondered how many of these services have already been achieved, because I believe there were quite a lot involved when the three towns came together. And then the last one is on the service rationalisations, and this is to do with, I presume, non-statutory services that we provide, and I just wondered if any of them are likely to have to go, and that includes such things as tourism, council comms, parks, culture and events, and our leisure facilities.
Councillor Mellor.
Yeah, thank you very much. So all three examples I think you gave in terms of will things be paused were largely predominantly capital items. So for instance, a fibre, Folkestone, health hub, effectively. So the majority of that spend is in relation to capital. So that won't have an impact in terms of the MTFP budget. There may be so as far as I'm aware, that's not the case in terms of it being stopped. Then there may well be other things, expenditure in year that we're not committed to, and what now service directors have to do is to, I believe it's anything over £5,000 of new expenditure has to come and it has to be formally approved by myself and a Section 151 officer. We technically don't need to carry on doing that because we put that in until we could display a balanced budget, but we've taken the view that it's a really good discipline. We're trying to drive as big a surplus as we can. We've already up to £7.8 million surplus in year, so we think it's a good and useful discipline. But the right things will still go ahead. But your three specific points were largely capital. Your question about harmonisation is the majority of services have been harmonised, but there are still other there are still aspects where we haven't done that across BCP, and for for a number of different reasons, both in terms of waiting for national guidance and national policy before we further harmonise. But the majority of that has been done. And then in terms of the point around service rationalisation, yes, that we are looking to be more efficient, be more creative about how we can deliver a lot of the services, but all of the services, in terms of what's got to the budget position you've seen in front of you tonight, none of the services you've mentioned, tourism, culture, leisure, are cancelled in any way, shape or form. And we believe we can actually deliver often a lot of the services we've been able to deliver, but just increasingly efficiently and commercially. So I hope that gives you some comfort.
Sorry, can I just clarify that about the projects, such as the fibre optic cable one? Weren't the council going to borrow money to do that? It wasn't money that we already had.
Yeah, so specifically in terms of the fibre optic, the piece, that was a futures fund, where that would have been a part of the, I think we're calling it the LGR dividend. So effectively, the £50 million of LGR savings that we've made, we're going to put £1.4 million of those through to create a £50 million capital sum. Then that was to be used for the effectively the smart fibre piece of work there. That has that's already gone through through full council, so that is something we are progressing with. But the for instance, what were the other two you mentioned about the health hub? And I forget the third one. So for instance, the health hub is a good example. It's something again we'd have to bring back before we were able to do it. But we've already made a full council decision in terms of the smart infrastructure. Pokestown, wasn't it? Effectively, yes. So that money hasn't been called down yet, but we're committed to spending it. And as and when that project comes forward, the anticipation is we will still spend that money. It is in our the repayment cost of that. The cost of that is in our medium-term financial plan.
Mr. Richards, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, maybe just to add some colour to the response of the leader, in the sense that there is a very detailed description as to the expenditure control that is currently in place, and we're very clear about what's included and what's not included. And so, for example, the housing revenue account isn't included because it doesn't impact on the general fund. Any statutory services isn't included because we know, to a minimum standard, because we know we have to deliver those services to a minimum standard. There are other aspects, that it's very clear within those overall controls. What we do recognise actually applies equally to revenue and capital. However, a lot of capital, you've actually got grant funding, third-party contributions, and if those schemes are funded through those mechanisms, then the control doesn't apply. There are certain instances where actually we have made commitments to borrow to fund those capital proposals or schemes. In those circumstances, we will look at them, because in all circumstances where they don't meet the criteria, the first thing we do is, has the commitment already been made? If the commitment's already been made, then it's difficult to row back on it. The commitment hasn't been made and it's borrowing, and that's something for us to review, consider, have a conversation between me and the leader and other people with regards to where we are and whether or not that's one of the proposals that we would potentially proceed with. That would be a discussion point between me and the leader.
Are you happy that I move on now? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Earle, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. So, a bit like Councillor Bartlett, I'm very worried about the risk and looking, or should I bring that forward? And looking at disposing of assets by March. Like that's quite a fine deadline. But really, there's a bit of a narrative here. We know that when the Conservatives took control, there was a raid of those reserves which were earmarked for transformation. Okay. Obviously, you hope to replace that by being able to sell the beach huts to an SPV and then hang on to surplus assets for some reason, maybe for investment. Obviously, the beach hut sale was cancelled, and just last month, I couldn't I couldn't come here because I had COVID, but I was listening at home, hearing that, you know, government were willing to work with us on our transformation programme. And I'm really glad now that we've realised, or you've realised, that this is actually a very serious thing to have to take a capitalisation directive from government. It relinquishes so much control to government to decide the future of this council. So what are the other options? Adam Richards has just said we have a capitalisation directive, or we have a sale of assets. And you also said yourself, Councillor Mellor, that you would rather have a sale of assets rather than make cuts and savings. So, you know, a sale of assets, I don't want to say it, but I'm going to have to say it, aren't I? To avoid bankruptcy, you're selling assets, and to sell assets to avoid bankruptcy could also be called a fire sale. Would you agree with that?
Councillor Mellor.
Thank you very much for that, and I hope you've from COVID, Councillor Earl.
Thank you.
No, I absolutely conceive that, and I think that's look, let's be fair and straight. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. We've been really clear, that we do not think that it is in the long-term interest of local government to be forced to sell its assets. We think that if you develop the assets properly, use them properly over a longer period of time, that's how local government becomes long-term financially sustainable. I absolutely, we're so far removed from a situation of bankruptcy. If you look at all other upper tier local authorities who are publishing these figures, we're in such a strong and stable financial position. Again, we have issues around the DFG, not DFG, the special needs effectively placements that we've got with a large amount there we need to do. We weren't in the first wave of support was needed in that, but it is still a material thing we need to address, and we will. We're looking at putting more into reserves as we're able to. We've put a commitment to put an extra £700,000 over the next 5 years, each and every year into reserves to build our reserves up. But so we do not believe we should be selling assets across the board. We had a previous administration. We've had the leader of your group that's now on record saying we should have raised council tax even further. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to spend those that revenue money in terms of making sure residents had money back in their pockets. We wanted to make sure it was spent on things like the summer response that we've just heard about. How an absolute success was, and we are now finding a way of doing that. If we have to sell some more assets than we wanted to do, I'd rather not have done it, and I'm not going to apologise for trying to work really, really hard not to sell those assets. But if we ultimately have to, it's the right thing for us to do, then fine. We have had a turbulent situation in terms of government and the ministers we've been discussing this with over this year, this summer. But we're going to take responsible decisions to make sure we've got a strong and sustainable financial situation for this council. We clearly do have, and if that means we have to sell, some, non-core assets, then we will do that.
Yes, you want to come back?
Thank you. No, I don't necessarily disagree with selling assets in general. I think, we all have to make the most of what we've got. But what I'm interested in is why you didn't sell the surplus assets, the assets that are a drain on expenditure, rather than assets which are, contributing to income. That's what I really struggle to understand. And just to finish that, I'm not going below the line, but there are a couple which are, about these sales. With this short gap between now and March, are sales lined up? And the other thing I have to ask is, has income from the properties already come out of the MTFP? So has that been accounted for in the MTFP? I think that's what I want to ask really. It's around that surplus assets and actual assets that do generate a bit of an income.
Yeah, and again, sorry, Chair, through you. So yes, so in terms of any revenue generating assets, has that been taken out in terms of the illustrative MTFP we've got in front of us? Yes, the answer to that is. So if we're expecting a capital receipt in, we have removed any income. I think this is a really important point, and it comes back to our sort of core argument and position around this. We do not believe we should sell revenue generating generating assets. We do not think that that's something that is in the long-term interest of any council. But it makes much more sense for us to sell those assets than it does to sell assets that can be hugely beneficial for us in terms of regeneration, who are much more strategic. You've also got a government who've talked consistently and in terms of strengthening the criteria around investment for yield. So if we're in a position of trying to be much more traditional in terms of how we're funding local government, then it makes sense for us to look at those assets that government are saying effectively we would challenge more likely whether there was an ability to buy those again. So by moving to a position where we're retaining key assets that we think can have long-term regeneration and financial sustainability impact, we think they're the assets to keep. And in your other point was around the likelihood of delivering sales by a certain period. Well, we have a degree of confidence that we'll be able to do that, but we're also making sure we've got the capitalisation direction moving forward and ready to go if we need to. But it's right that we actually look to sell some of those assets. We've got a small number of assets we're able to sell. We believe we are able to sell and have a confidence we are able to sell between now and that period. If that changes, then we'll update again and we'll come back and move that forward. But effectively we are of the belief that we've got some key assets we can sell, some non-strategic assets we can sell, and any of the MTFP impacts have been taken into account.
Councillor Allison.
Thank you. I'm finding this whole process to be extremely bizarre. I can only come to the conclusion, really, that the leader of the council is a complete fantasist, and that's absolutely no idea what's going on with his financial position of his own council. His answers change, the narrative changes from one scrutiny meeting to the next, from one full council meeting to the next, as to who's responsible. Is it the war in Ukraine? Is it the cost of living crisis? Is it COVID? Is it government policy? And the only thing is not accounted for as to the fact that we're in a position is the policy of his own administration, and he doesn't seem to be willing to take any kind of responsibility all the way through these meetings.
Do you have a question?
Yes, just sorry? Am I not allowed to make a statement? I don't believe there's anything in the rules that stops me from...
Carry on.
Thank you very much. So the question is, we've talked earlier on about how we're supposed to have faith, and my question would be to you, why should we have faith in you when you've come before these meetings several times in the past and told us to have faith in you? You've done it before with the SPV, you've done it before with budgets, and it always falls apart. Transformation always falls apart. You always come back to these meetings saying, we're confident that in the future things are going to go well. But every time you've come and said that to us, it hasn't gone well. So why should we trust you this time? This is like the 7th or 8th time we've had discussions where the financial budget is not meeting the expectations that we've outlined in previous years, and yet we're supposed to just continue to blindly trust you to deliver them.
Councillor Andrews, you had a question.
Yeah.
Oh, Councillor Mellor, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, but we did actually end up with a question, Chair, so I'd be delighted to actually answer that one. I think in terms of a fantasy land, effectively or not, just let's have a look at some facts effectively. So we do have £55 million worse financial position because of the cost of living crisis. In February, we weren't aware of £25 million worth of inflationary pressures that I think anybody in the room, well, perhaps other than Councillor Ellison, would agree was largely brought forward in terms of Putin's war in Ukraine, and that has been the large factor in terms of the inflation environment we're now in. So in that environment, we've actually delivered a £7.8 million surplus. We're in the process of delivering a £7.8 million surplus this year. That is a strong track record. We have balanced, even though we've had £25 million in year, we've got £30 million pressure next year. We are now showing how we can balance that. So again, that's a fact. We have delivered. Previous administrations, previous councils have delivered over £50 million of savings in terms of transformation programs. And one thing we didn't deliver was the £15 million of staff cuts that you were on the cabinet pushing forward when before we'd done any of the back office savings to deliver them. So there's quite strong argument in terms of what we are able to deliver. We've also done that in the context of effectively back-to-back council tax, freezes in Christchurch, and then the freeze we were able to put forward across the board around core council tax last year. So, if you're talking about, fancy land, economics, there's a really clear track record of delivery, and there's one of us living in a fantasy land, and I strongly believe it's not me.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I don't think there's anything in the Constitution that prevents people making statements. Questions, yes. Statements as well. I've got 2 or 3 questions, may be considered to be statements. The first one is, why is a fire sale of assets better than borrowing the £20 million? Was it perhaps the condition of the loan that the government would be coming in to check the books? Also, you said that you inherited only a small reserve from the Unity Alliance, which is strange because I can't reconcile it with the fact that you spent £70 million from reserves over the past couple of years. The assets that are suggested to be sold, as Adam Richards has indicated, are all income producing. It's been mentioned by you that that's been accounted for in the budget, but I can't understand how we're going to fill that black hole of that money not coming in, because obviously that revenue coming in is paying for people's salaries, paying the bills for numerous things. And I'm also bemused as to who decided the list of assets. We've been presented, it's confidential information, with some assets which are listed, but why not sell some assets which aren't producing some rent, because then we wouldn't be losing the income. But hey, on the assets that are intended to be sold, can you make a commitment that the tenants will be given the chance, if they want, to buy the freeholds? And I think the final point is, about council tax. You said the Unity Alliance, were wanting to raise the council tax. Well, obviously the government does allow local authorities to raise it up to a certain level. I'm confused. Are you intending to put a council tax freeze on for the budget, which you'll be bringing to full council for next year? Thank you.
Can I just ask officers, do we have to go below the line for an answer on this?
I think my sense is not if we're working on the general principles of the sale. As soon as anybody wants to talk about individual sites, then absolutely we will.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Sorry, Councillor.
Not at all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. I've talked about it, and I'm not going to repeat answers I've given earlier. But the point we're saying is there are some non-strategic assets, and they're the ones we should be looking at. We have got a huge number of regeneration assets. We think they should be protected, and we should effectively develop them for the both for our long-term financial sustainability, but also for the good of the area. You're creating a narrative which is completely false, Councillor Andrews. You just have to look at the MTFP in front of you, and that is a balanced position for 23-24. It's an £11 million gap over 4 years. So in terms of how is that going to be filled? It already has been filled. You've heard my answer to Councillor Earl. Any revenue implications have already been put into the MTFP. If you look across the wider local government, we're actually in one of the strongest positions of any upper tier local authority. We've got a surplus in year, and we've got a balance over the next 4 years. Your leader of your group is actually is on record of saying that we should have put council tax up more. We're really proud we haven't. We think that the £11 million that is in extra in people's pockets is really important, and never more effective that we've been able to deliver that. In terms of what we do with council tax going forward, the budget is clear, and you'll have seen, if you'd read the report, that the budget is clear in terms of the assumptions around council tax, and that will be in terms of the current MTFP, the 2% is in there for future years, as well as the adult social care precept. I've said earlier, we look to improve the budget through the cycle between now and January, and in January we will bring forward our detailed proposals around the budget for next year.
One very small point. I've used the expression fire sale, so has my colleague over there. It's less than 5 months until the full council meeting on the 21st of March. We've been told that any asset over £500,000 needs full council approval. We've got Christmas and New Year between now and then. So we're probably down to 4 months. And I haven't got an answer from you to Councillor Earl's question about whether the marketing has already started. But, you know, if it's going from a cold start, you know, anybody who's bought or sold a house recently, you've got not only the marketing, you've got the legal process. You know, to succeed in selling those properties by the deadline of the 21st of March, or, you know, the week thereafter, there's not much time left.
Councillor Mellor.
So it wasn't effectively aware of that question, Chair. Effectively, you know, we are looking to move some of those assets, you know, through a disposal process, you know, that's the assumption the budget's been prepared on to date. If at any point and I think that's the right thing to do. I think it's the right, you know, thing to be displaying to government we're looking to do. And if at any point that assumption changes, then we will make different assumptions in terms of the budget.
Thank you. Before we go down below the line, I got one indication in the room, and also we've got somebody online. Now, I'm happy to exhaust the panel first, then we'll go online, and I see we have one member indicating from the corner. Are you happy that we do that, everybody? No other questions? Right, Councillor Iyengar, then Councillor Cox, and then we'll...
I'll be quick, Chairman. It may be a statement, not a question, alas. I'll try and turn it into a question. It's funny, I think I may have said this at a previous meeting. We've kind of succeeded in not having still the needed discussion on this topic. And I'm not trying to get all highbrow on us here, but what we've got is that this is one heck of a paper. Goodness me, there's so much work gone into this paper, but it's amazing how still we can't have the right discussion on this, because there's columns and columns of figures on this under a certain casting of headings, like redundancy costs, for instance, data and insight, contingency and capital receipts, without, for instance, phrasing that yet in a way such as, for instance, you know, bins, beaches, seafront, children's, adults, and subdivisions of those, where we can start to then see and then, as necessary, talk about what are the implications for plus and minus on that. And I'm aware that we have a cabinet system in this council. Some part of that will come here, some of it may not. It's in the purview of cabinet to finally decide, or full council to finally decide. But I think, you know, in line with some of the comments just now, is being where we are in mid-October and the lead times associated with those, I can only see a sort of, this is going to have to be crushed together, both the service implications and also the asset implications, to make this deal land. And especially if we're not going to accept the 20 million from government that it seems that's being offered. The very last point, Chair, the first thing that I mentioned right at the start of this, it's not come across in the narrative, which is this passing of the rugby ball, I think, from cabinet to the officers to say, how is this actually going to happen in real life, this delivery of this saving? It's not come across in the conversation that we've had. So, sorry, there's no question, Chair, but if I may just share that feeling, and we're going to have to move this one forward, aren't we, clearly? Thank you.
I don't know,
Unless there's any reaction, please. Thank you.
Chair, it's not a reaction to that point. It's just a clarification, I think, of a comment that was made by a member earlier in the discussion. In figure 3 of the report, within the section box that looks at adjustments in respect to resource levels, I just want to point out that that includes an assumed additional government funding in respect of social care on 2 levels. One is it includes an assumption of extra £12.8 million next year to cover the social care reforms and the cost of those reforms that we're anticipating next year. But I think as the risk section of the report highlights, that is a significant risk that they will match up, because in the past there has been a mismatch between government reforms, what it cost us and what that grant funding is. And that is something that we're going to have to keep a weathered eye on as we go through the next quarter. But in addition to that, we are also assuming an extra £3.1 million in additional social care grant funding. That is based on what the government have issued almost every single year since 2015. So it has some kind of logic to why you would make that assumption. It has been externally verified, if you like, not specifically verified, but there is external evidence to suggest that wouldn't be an unreasonable assumption to make. However, it is still a risk that we are assuming some additional government grant funding to specifically support social care next year, and clearly we'll need to see what the government come forward with over the next quarter. I just wanted to raise that point.
Thank you. Before we go to Councillor Cox, Councillor Farquhar, do you want to come in? And then we'll go to Councillor Cox online, and then we'll go below the line.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I do appreciate your indulgence. I will, and I do appreciate other members of this committee actually highlighting that this is a place for debate, as opposed to a place for a Q&A session. However, I will try to frame it as a question, and I think perhaps it's a question perhaps of Ms. Richards, if you're allowed, Chair, for you, is that it was raised by a member of this committee earlier, subject matter as regards the future of the accessibility lists for Folkestone Station. Just to remind residents that may be watching and not be aware of that, but just in summary, is that there was a commitment by this council for up to 2.6 million from the Futures Fund, as I understand it, which was borrowing, to fund the installation and the commissioning of accessibility lifts at Folkestone Station. In my understanding, that 2.6 million commitment is on the desk of whoever's running the DFT at the moment for a decision to use it for match funding from SWR budgets and from Network Rail. So my question, and perhaps we need an answer that residents can understand as opposed to those that are actually versed in how the budgets of local government actually run, is that, and the reason I ask that the residents can understand, because the Folkestone Station Action Group that have been campaigning for these lists for nearly 12 years now would like an answer that they can understand whether that money is safe and on that desk of the DFT. Is that money committed, and does that money still stand up, even though it came from borrowing, on the desk of whoever is making that decision for 2.6 up to 2.6 million, because the residents want to know, because that's what they understand. So perhaps Mr. Richards could give the answer in the appropriate manner that residents could actually understand.
So it's a shame that the member didn't ask that question in advance so that I could actually look at the detail of it and prepare a response. So I would like to be afforded that opportunity to take that one away and respond, if you, through you, Chair, to all members of the committee once I've looked at the detail, please.
If I may, Chair, I think that's perfectly acceptable. And as I say, the Folkestone Station Action Group would be eagerly expecting that reply. And could we have a commitment that that reply will be made public as soon as possible?
Assuming that Mr. Richards is happy with that.
Chair, I suggest I take it away. I do the research. I email every member of this committee, and perhaps it can be included in the minutes of the meeting to ensure that there is public acknowledgement of the response.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I'm aware that Councillor Mellor needs to leave fairly soon. I suggest we now go below the line. Under section 100A. Oh, I beg your pardon, I forgot. How can I forget Councillor Cox? Councillor Cox.
How indeed, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think they talked quite rightly about us being ahead of peer authorities, but I'm afraid we're only ahead of peer authorities because we're first in the line for the begging bowl, and that's what we effectively had to do. Councillor Earl quite rightly talked about or went through the different different plans that we've had so far. We started with Plan A, which was that we had 70 odd million pounds worth of reserves. We then went on to the beach huts, which was a disaster. We then went on to the capital directive, which we were told last time was what he was always planning to do in the long run anyway. And now we're on fire sales. Now we're expected to believe we're confident about making these savings that he said. I just wanted to report that according to the auditors, at least in the audit meeting only a few days ago, they're not confident at all. In fact, in an answer to a question by the vice chair of the committee, he definitely said he was not confident about us achieving what we're suggesting that we're going to achieve. In terms of the figure 3 that is very clearly put out in the paper, you've clearly got 41 million pounds worth of either cuts to services or unidentified services. And I'd just point out that 4.6 million pounds of those savings cuts are unidentified and has been identified as being painful. That 4.6 would effectively equate to a council tax increase last time of about 1 or 2%. That is effectively the choice that the leader has taken. He'd prefer to have really painful cuts in services rather than increased tax. And that's clearly a political judgment which he's taking and which others are not taking. I just wanted to actually go on and talk about the children's services transformational budget, because I believe there's further down, I think it's in Appendix A, we talk about 1.9 million pounds being in transformational costs, and yet just below that it talks about the savings, and in 1 year we talk about £1 million worth of savings, and in the year after 300 million pounds. It seems to me that we're spending nearly £2 million on transformational costs for children's services, and we're getting about 1.3 million pounds of savings, which doesn't seem appropriate in the services. So I'd quite like Adam Richards, if possible, to comment on that and just explain to us why that makes sense, because there is a number of those costs which I didn't really quite understand, particularly the top one, as to what it was. What are we spending that money on? So that's the question I've got.
Mr. Richards.
Chair, I can respond to a couple of those questions. In the first instance, I think Councillor Cox referenced the fact that the £4.6 million is not identified. That is not the case. The 4.6, it has been identified, although actually it has been also recognised those are the more challenging proposals, that we would hope to avoid through this process, but they have been identified. So that was the first element. The second element with regards to Appendix A, I think perhaps if there's any specific details that the member wants around the items of expenditure, then I can take that away and talk to the Director of Children's Services. But just to emphasise the point, the savings that are scheduled at the bottom are presented on an incremental basis. So actually that £9.84 million is actually, a saving you'll make each and every year. And then the following year in 24 or 25, that goes up by a further £300,000 that will be delivered each and every year thereafter. So those are incremental annual savings that will be achieved. So therefore, if you're spending £1.9 million, then it's basically a 2-year payback, slightly less.
Councillor Mellor, did you want to come in?
No, I think Adam Richards has quite clearly explained that, Chair. So I'll happily leave it to him.
Very much.
Can I just come back that I appreciate they may be identified, but it would be useful if we knew what they were so that people can assess how painful these cuts will be, and that there is effectively £41 million worth of cuts in this figure 3, and in total they will be pretty bad. But that 4.6 has been specifically identified as being very painful, and it would be useful to know exactly how painful they will be.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I think now we can go below the line.
Sorry, I think Councillor Cox, also, I had the same question actually on the Children's Services page, if I may. The question was asked about, I highlighted it, the one where, to Adam, 1.9 million of expenditures and two savings of 984 and 300. So seemingly a cost of £2 million for a saving of 1.3. There may be sort of non-financial reasons why that's worth that. I think Councillor Cox was asking what was the logic for that, please.
So it's just emphasising the point that these are, the 984 that's shown in 23-24 will also be saved in 24-25, 25-26, 26-27. That's an annual saving. In the second year, it goes up by a further £300,000 to about 1.2 million, about £3 million. And that'll be saved, in total every year thereafter. So it's an annual saving compared to a one-off cost.
Sorry, do you want to use mic?
What is Eden Brown, the first line?
Now you're testing my knowledge and my expertise, but my understanding is it's a contract that the council has with an external firm, probably by the name of Eden Brown, that provides specific social care support to children's services. But I need to go take that away and ask the Director of Children's Services to provide a little bit further detail, if that helps.
Okay, so it does mean of the 2 million total cost, $1 million, lines 1 and 2, $1 million is on consultancy. Okay.
Okay, I see nobody else. So now I'm going to read the notice. Under section 100A, in brackets 4, the Local Government Act 1972, public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 in part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. So can you confirm? Councillor Bartlett.
Thanks, yeah. I think I've got it straight.
So, okay, so back on again. We discussed the paper, and there are 7 recommendations on the paper. Are we happy that we move on now? Can I ask Lindsay to come make an announcement?
Just in relation to your scrutiny of the budget papers on the monthly basis, you made a resolution in September to do that monthly. I sent you a communication today about a date proposed for November. There was consultation done to find a suitable date for the relevant attendees. That would be a one-off meeting just to look at the finance papers going to Cabinet. I have heard from the leader today that he wouldn't be available for that date. Our investigation into a suitable date only really made that date suitable. There weren't any other options. So I'm left with the situation where we either look for another date, and it might be a daytime meeting, potentially, Chairman, and I'd like the committee's view on that, to see if the leader can come and attend as he has today, or in that circumstance, you could also agree to have a deputy come in the leader's place. So I'd like a steer from the committee as to how you'd like to proceed.
Councillor Iyengar.
Yeah, thank you. I think the principle is a good one to, further to what I was saying earlier, but we've had some discussion here. It's all yet still to do, this conversation about the financials, and the sadly the best bit is still definitely yet to come. So I like the principle of we have a regular drumbeat on this. I'll support whatever date for expediency we go for, and if it's the leader or whoever the best person is, I think it's just important on the record. We've had a meeting, we've got suitably relevant paper, and we've debated it, not just asked questions, and that's the best we can do, and I support that.
Thank you. Does anybody dissent from that? That makes it a lot easier. So, over to you.
So to be clear, you're happy for me to confirm the date with the deputy attending? I think that's what Councillor Iyengar was expressing.
Could I suppose we want the most suitable person who can be there, who can answer questions, almost irrespective of title, because now we need to get clarity and answers. So I'll if you get my meaning there, whoever the right person is. Thank you.
So on a show of hands, are those in agreement? Okay. Thank you. Can I call a 5-minute recess? We've been going now for an hour and a half, sorry, 2.5 hours, and ask that we be back in 5 minutes. Thank you very much indeed. Welcome back. I'm sorry we took a short break there. I'd like to introduce Councillor Jane Kelly, portfolio holder for Communities, Health and Leisure. And together with the Chief Executive, they're going to present the next item, which is the cost of living pressures. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good evening, members. Long meeting, but we got there at last with the last paper. So this report sets out the impacts of the cost of living pressures on the council and our communities and describes some of the council's responses, working with key public and private sector partners to support our residents. Pressures are seen across the area, arising from the significant increase in energy prices and rapidly increasing inflation. The council itself is also suffering from these impacts and therefore also faces the need to increase fees and charges to reflect the increased cost of providing services. We are naturally working with our partners to ensure that any available opportunities are used to the best advantage to help our most vulnerable residents as we move from a thankfully mild autumn into winter. We know that prices are rising, which increases the cost that everyone sees in their household bills. Food, energy, clothes, fuel, all have risen in price and have to be somehow budgeted for. Against this backdrop, we are determined to work within our communities, using a strength-based approach in order to build on the assets, skills and experience which already exists, empowering local people to achieve positive outcomes in the long term. All of our community development staff are now on the ground, encouraging residents to recognise the existing talents and build on those, to support their neighbours and friends where required. Our very successful Vibrant Communities Partnership Board has been hearing about the work undertaken by our communities team and partners across BCP and predominantly in our priority neighbourhoods. We also read of the importance of developing long-term resilience within our communities, rather than a reliance on financial support. Reference is also made to the other impacts of financial hardship on relationships and how coercive control and mental abuse can increase as a result, along with a rise in fraud, scams and acquisitive crime, all of which impact on our local communities in a negative way. Other impacts may be those of poor health, caused by lack of nutritious food, homelessness due to people not being able to keep up their mortgage or rent payments, substance misuse and poor mental health caused by stress. All of these will have far-reaching effects on the lives of our residents. A cost of living conference was held in July of this year to give frontline workers across BCP, both council staff and partners, an awareness of the wide range of support available. A memory stick was given to every attendee containing all of the information, and there have been requests for a further event to update on new and emerging schemes and opportunities. This is something that we are currently arranging. The Access to Food Partnership. This again is about sharing information to enable communities to be able to access food when in crisis, but also, and importantly, to equip them with confidence, skills and resources for their ongoing needs. Partnership received lottery funding earlier this year to continue the work for a further 3 years. An Access to Food map has been developed, which can be downloaded to your phone and gives details of 58 community food settings. It's been accessed over 49,000 times since launch. We also have a new Bank the Food app, which tells you when you are near a food dropping off point and exactly which items they are short of. We all should download that one. The Together We Can steering group was established in 2020 to lead the community response to the pandemic. Membership has now broadened and is now focused on the many challenges faced by our residents. I chair that group, and our different work streams, as shown in paragraph 36 of your paper, are having great success in ensuring that knowledge is shared and used. Following the successful delivery of the Household Support Fund grants 1 and 2, HSF 3, I always think that sounds a bit like a railway line, but which doesn't maybe exist, has brought us a further amount exceeding £2.6 million to distribute to households in the most need. During HSF 1, between October 21 and end of March 22, almost 6,500 vouchers So 63,500 vouchers were issued to households with children, and a range of support provided to 9,166 households. We have the same amount of funding for October 22 to March 23, which is now being distributed. It should be mentioned here that Citizens Advice and the Dorset Community Foundation have been excellent partners in the delivery of parts of this fund, with their huge network of clients and knowledge of their communities. Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service undertake the Safe and Well visits, as well as the Safe and Independent Living Scheme, to help people live independently and safely in their own homes. The BCP Affordable Warmth Partnership is a multi-agency team delivering energy assistance. These are schemes which can provide help with insulation and heating improvements. The Homelessness Reduction Partnership is a collection of services from all sectors to address homelessness in our area. The work done has been commended by DLUC and national organisations. It does focus on prevention and so provides targeted information about financial issues and recognition of impending homelessness and therefore early intervention. Working with landlords and other providers, home housing providers, is very much part of the work of this partnership. Citizens Advice are well known to us all for their work supporting our residents in need of financial and other advice. It's been calculated that the economic and social value of this advice in the BCP area can be many millions of pounds per annum. Citizens Advice are also instrumental in helping deliver some of the HSF payments. Our procurement, IT and Revs and Bens department have worked really hard to ensure that the approximately 140,000 eligible residents received the £150 rebate on time. This was a huge piece of work and those members of staff deserve our gratitude. A cost of living working group has been set up and they are working with registered housing providers and BCP homes to understand the impact of rising prices on our residents and looking at all the ways we can assist or enable, some of which are detailed in paragraph 53 of the paper. And they include the warm welcome spaces, lunch clubs, food growing groups, and linking any providers with surplus food. The paper also includes the initiatives and support that we're providing for our staff members. This includes advice and support with various services available to BCP staff, who may well also be impacted by the increase in cost of living. Discussions are also underway regarding staff salaries and benefits. We are looking at how we can increase council income from fees and charges to ensure that there is full cost recovery for providing a particular service. The target for the increase is currently 10% across the board, to be implemented early next year. Chairman, I hope that this provides a resume of the content report for you and members of your panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly, and congratulations. That's a fine job. Councillor Edwards, you wanted to speak?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Kelly. I just wondered about under the income, number 77. It says that there'll be a review of new areas of charging, including the potential to introduce overnight parking fees. And I'm just a little bit concerned about that because over the years, the last couple of years certainly, we've built many flats that don't have any parking provided, and they will be using car parks or the streets to park their cars. I mean, they may not be using these cars every day, but very often a lot of them do have cars and they need somewhere to park. So I'm a little concerned that these flats, mainly flats that have been built without parking, they're now going to be subjected to having fees for parking their vehicles overnight. So I think if that is proposed, I do think we need a review of our parking SPD, where we're allowing more and more housing to go into areas where there is a real squeeze on the parking available, and certainly will be a squeeze on people's income if they've suddenly got to start paying for their parking overnight.
Chief Executive, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, certainly, that's just an example, I think, of areas that people are looking at. It's been raised with us by a couple of councillors. So I wouldn't take that as saying that's the new policy, that's what we're going to do, but we're going to look at all areas. And yes, if you were to introduce that sort of item, then you would have to look at parking, at least in that zone or in that area. I think the key thing is potentially looking at harmonisation of car parking charges, because we know we have very similar car parks that charge very different amounts and have different parking structure, charging structures, whether it's by the number of hours or by the charges for those hours. So that is intended to be a general paragraph, not the instruction of a new policy. But of course, we would have to look at all the implications if we were to introduce anything like that.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Three fairly short questions, I hope. The cost of living conference handed out some USBs. I thought could be handy if we had one, because if it summarises all the assistance and the way that the council is organised to provide help, that would be useful for us when we're, responding to residents who often come to us for help and assistance. So that's just a request, really. I was a bit concerned about why we would pay the £150 to second home owners via the council tax system, when that would only have to be repaid. And I don't understand necessarily why. Do we not have records where a house is a second home? Is that the reason for it? So you've got no choice, you've just got to wait for someone to own up and say, actually it's a second home, so I've got to give you the money back.
Mr. Rich.
Chair, if I may just come in on that, I think you almost answered your own question in the sense that years ago, second homeowner discount, and under those rules, they were particularly keen to tell us it was a second home and go through that process. Since those rules end, there's been no mechanism for capturing when a home is a second home or not, and therefore, in these circumstances, well, pay it all, and then they can then repay it, because then at least we've got the money out to our local community, and trying to protect our local community as much as possible.
Thank you. Just one last one, Madam Chair. Of course. Thank you. The Vibrant Communities Partnership, the board oversees the community engagement and consultation strategy. My question is there a strategy for the community engagement? Because I don't think we have one. And if we do, it's out of date. And so what's the status of it?
Councillor Kelly.
Do we have one?
Yeah, we do. We have the consultation strategy, and there were two that both went through council, I don't know, a year ago maybe? Fairly recently. They've been written and went through council. I will find them and send them to you, Councillor Bartlett.
I need to look at it. I apologise if I'm raising a question unnecessarily, but what's in the back of my mind is that there doesn't seem to be a mechanism for communities to engage with councils, like the old forums that we had. They don't seem to be structured, or I know we sort of agreed we would carry on with the old way just temporarily until the new engagement strategy was formulated. There was quite a bit of work done prior to the lockdown, where people were going and doing consultation about engagement in supermarkets and things like that. And then I understood that consultation didn't bring forth a new strategy. If I'm wrong,
it was agreed for 2021 to 2024, the 3-year period. Adopted in 2021 actually, so I've just discovered. I'm sure we can get a member briefing for you, for members, if we want a bit of an update on it. And also, I can definitely get you a USB stick with that information on it.
Councillor Long, you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. This is a really difficult one for me to read because of my work and my volunteering in this sector. It's quite emotional, actually, because this is a snapshot of all the really good things going on, in the charitable sector. But I need to warn everyone, there is too much pressure being put on the charitable sector by local government and by national government. And when it collapses, when the food banks are out of food, when we're not collecting surplus anymore, when there's no more money for crisis payments? Who's going to pick that up? And what I would have really have liked to have seen from this paper is more of a, how are we bracing for resilience? You know, how are we helping people build resilience and helping people protect themselves against cost of living? You know, we are realistically looking at about 20% of all families living in destitution if things continue the way they are in terms of inflation. The charitable sector can't be picking that up. It's just not possible. You know, even though we have some really, really good organisations locally who are really committed, it's not realistic. So as much as the government has been giving us, you know, the household support fund, I would really, really like to see some sort of local welfare assistance fund, something which is a crisis payment or even a crisis loan for people who are literally, you know, not going to eat that day if they don't get some sort of income. I think it's actually really sad, you know, hearing that 49,000 people have accessed the access to food map. Like that, how is that acceptable? How is that allowed? You know, we should be seriously looking at what we're doing as a society to think that, you know, it's okay for families to be in such desperation that they're having to seek food from food providers. And that's not even taking into account, you know, the fuel poverty that we're going to see, the fact people will not be able to heat their homes, the pressures that will have on households, and, you know, particularly as we've seen in sort of the food sector, is children who are really, really struggling to, you know, live in warm homes where they would thrive. I think we're going to see a massive downturn economically for the next 15 years, really, because of the impact of this and a failure to act by local and by national government. So yeah, I just wanted to raise that. I think it's bleak. I think that this paper takes a snapshot rather than actually addressing the reality. And I think we need to put some serious plans in place for how we as a council are going to be dealing with people knocking on the door saying, you know, my lights have been switched off and I can't afford to turn the heating on. Or can you give us some food, please? Because I think that's the reality of what we're going to see. Thank you. Oh, I do have a question, actually. Oh. Sorry, after all of that. Okay, so it was about the household support fund second round. Can I ask if any money was returned to government?
Sorry, yes, thank you. The second round, we had the directive from government that a certain percentage had to go to pensioners, and we did find it quite difficult to find enough pensioners, but with using our partners, particularly Prama and the Dorset Community Foundation and Citizen Advice, we did manage to find enough, and so to my knowledge we didn't give any back. We really don't want to do that because, as you have said, absolutely we need every penny that we have. The amount of funding that we have is national policy. That, you know, we have to go with what we have and absolutely use it to the best that we can. I wouldn't say that we are not addressing reality. The reason why we have the Winter Resilience Group, we have the other group which is mainly from our housing providers. We are addressing reality with the Access to Food Partnership, have successfully applied for lottery funding. We are going for every pot of funding that there is within the charitable sector to make sure that we have everything we can to help our residents. And the fact that we have 10 new community development staff on the ground, finding those people who need help, you know, building resilience within the communities to make sure that they can be as strong as they can be looking ahead. Because, yeah, we understand and we know that it isn't going to get any better for a while. But, you know, I don't think we could be found wanting in our desire and the ways that we're working to try and achieve that.
You want to come back?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for, you know, engaging with me at the time about the Household Support Fund. It was incredibly stringent to allocate a third to pensioners. There was not the need. It should have been done on need. Can I ask, what's the changes in Household Support Fund in the third round?
Yep. we don't have that criteria this time, so it will be children for food and the preschool meal vouchers. So and the rest have to be families in need really. So that's it's not quite so difficult. We actually did manage to find. We gave pensioners 417, nearly 418,000 last time. So 4,960 households. So I think we did quite well with finding those people. Thank you.
Okay.
And one final sort of comment, really. We've just been talking about selling off assets to raise money for, transformation. To see, for me, it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. I think no one should go hungry. I actually think everyone would agree in this room, wouldn't they? I would like to see a lot more from this administration in terms of addressing that head on and freeing up money to create a welfare assistance fund like other councils have. Obviously, it was abolished here and Bournemouth Council in, I think, 2017 or something. But it would be, I think that there needs to be that crisis support for and contingency for when the charitable sector can't cope anymore.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards, you wanted to come back with a question?
Yes, it was just on the local provider Ridgewater Energy that's providing access for free loft or cavity wall installation. I did have a resident that contacted me about this. He was told in August that he qualified and there's absolutely no funding available. So I think it's quite sad because obviously we're coming into the winter and this is when people realise that their loft needs insulating or the cavity wall needs doing. So hopefully that the team are looking for other forms of funding to give our residents this access to these services that we are advertising, and we're advertising them on our website too.
Councillor Kelly, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure whether Mr. Richards would know about that one at all.
Go nods.
No, I think we'll have to find the answer.
Yeah, I was going to say if you could
get
I will.
The answer,
and could you mail it to all the members of the
Absolutely, yeah. Councillor Edwards, could you just clarify the question once more, please? Sorry.
Yes, Ridgewater Energy is to do with, yeah, I know. Yeah, there's no funding, it's all gone.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. It's difficult because this report, I think, it is a tad disingenuous. I think it's a bit sneaky the way that this report has been put together. So the fundamental purpose of the report, and indeed it's the entirety of recommendation B, is that the charges and for fees and services that we give out as a council are all going up by 10%. So this report has been created, and it first of all lays out all of the problems in our communities because of the cost of living crisis, which are horrendous and people shouldn't have to be dealing with. Then it lists quite a significant list of actions being taken by the council and its partners, a lot of which is, fantastic pieces of work, but I would agree with previous speakers that it probably doesn't actually go anywhere near as far as it can go to solve some of these problems. And I accept that it's not really the authority's fault because a lot of these things are dictated by central government policy. And then the ending is, then the last 3 points is that we're going to put the fees up. So it's almost as if you knew you had no choice but to put the fees and services up by 10%, but to sort of make it seem a little bit more like a bit more swallowable, you've wrapped it up in this idea that we are, this warm fuzzy feeling that we're out helping people, and actually fundamentally we're doing good work, but within the constraints that we have, and that the outcome of that is that actually we're not scratching the surface or solving any of those problems. And I feel like this report kind of, if you read through it, it kind of makes you feel like we're doing enough when actually in reality we're not.
That's okay.
Thank you, and thanks, Councillor Allison, for bringing that up. You are right that there will never be enough money, but on the other hand, the fees and charges, they will be spread across everyone. Whether the support and the different funding streams that I'm talking about are actually aimed at our more vulnerable residents. So it's not quite the same cohort. You're not really comparing the two. Thank you.
Any more? Okay, well, in that case, thank you, Councillor Kelly. The recommendations are A and B to go to Cabinet, and we'll stop at that point. No recommendations, no. Are you happy that we put through recommendations A and B? Which are?
Those are at Cabinet.
Right, okay.
Not at you, so unless we have anything specific
No, okay, no, that's that. Can I move on now to item 9? And I'd like to welcome Lindsay Marshall, who's the Overview and Scrutiny Specialist, who's going to present this report.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll try and be as brief and direct as I can, so I'm conscious of the time, but I would like some steer from the committee on your work plan. So if I take you to the pack in your Modern Gov pack is page 86. That lists the items for your December meeting. You do have quite a number of items. You've got 6 items listed. It was originally aimed to be a crime and disorder meeting, inviting the PCC along as well, but some cabinet items have joined that meeting. So I acknowledge that there are additional items on there because requests and everybody has reasons why they want certain things, but I would, you've heard me say it before, but I would reiterate that 1 to 2 items on an agenda is ideal, and after that you're going to start diminishing the effectiveness of the scrutiny that you're doing. So I'd just like you to look at that and reconfirm that you want all those items on there, if that is the will of the committee.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you. So a couple of things on this one. I think in terms of the December meeting, having a meeting with somebody like the PCC coming in, you really want that agenda item to be top of the list, because if you're inviting someone like that, you don't want, I've had it before where you sit around for many, many hours waiting for the subject to come up, and I think it'd be ideal to put him first. In terms of trying to be helpful, because there's obviously too many things on that December meeting, in terms of the future management of leisure centres, and this is one of the things that I've requested, I really only need to know when that report was coming to Cabinet, because we've been promised it for years and years and years and years, and it's never arrived. So if we could get clarification from the portfolio holder, then that can come off until, that actually comes up.
Sorry about that. Sorry, just declare a related interest. I'm just subbing tonight, so I wasn't aware of that. The leisure centre issue is on that, so I managed 2 of them, so to declare that. Thanks.
Yeah, yes.
Just to clarify on the leisure centre item, I believe that's going to Cabinet in January, and the portfolio holder and the officer have contacted Direct and asked that that could be brought to scrutiny earlier, so scrutiny could have an opportunity in December to help shape the final report that goes through to Cabinet. So in that respect, I think that's quite a timely point for you to be receiving it, and a worthwhile way of engaging in that Cabinet item. So it's probably worth retaining if that is the will of everybody.
I mean, I can throw my tuppence worth in. We've got 9 items on today's list, and you're proposing 6 for December. It is proposed that there are 6 for December. It's a case of are we happy to have a meeting this long every month, or how are we going to handle this? Got 3 people, so
there's only 3 items on today's agenda. There's 9 agenda item points. Yes. There's only 3 agenda items that are actually substantive topics.
Yeah. Okay, so we would be here all night. So,
sorry, just Chair, I want to declare an interest as I'm a director of BH Live and BH Live Enterprises.
Thank you. I suppose I ought to declare my membership to the Arts Council as well, but no, we're not. Yes, Councillor Edwards.
Can I just ask about that leisure centres, whether that's going to include BH Live or not?
Yes, it will include BH Live leisure centres and all the others right across BCP.
So what conclusions do we have? Does anybody want to suggest any changes? Councillor Kells.
Yeah, I mean, we're here, it's 9:10. We've only had, as Lewis said, we've only had 3 items on the agenda today. The thought of putting 4 or 5 on for a single meeting is absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't give people a chance to do proper scrutiny. If they're thinking, I'm here till 10 o'clock, I'm here till 11 o'clock. By 9 o'clock, most of us are waning anyway. So I think we need to look at the list you've got there and see which are the important ones that need to be done first. Obviously the leisure centre one, because that's going to become up at cabinet. We have to have the medium-term financial plan, so that's already 2 of your items taken up. Yeah. You then have to see which of the other one can be bumped back to the next meeting, or which one is, going to be more important. Is it the update from the Police and Crime Commission? I'm not even sure that this is the right panel for him to come to be perfectly honest with you.
It is. Can I just say that we've got a time issue here, because we're going to run out of year very soon.
Yeah. And then put in an extra meeting somewhere.
Councillor Bartlett's first.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the Community Safety Partnership Annual Report, if that's a statutory requirement.
Yeah,
I think it is, so you're probably going to have to do that one.
Yeah. Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, so we are having an additional, sorry, this is very loud. We're having an additional meeting, aren't we, in November, 21st of November. So could the leisure centres not go on that one? And in addition, because that's supposed to be for the budget, isn't it? So if we have the budget one in November and we put leisure centres on that one, wouldn't that then mean that it's just the top 4, which are all actually quite similar in terms of the fact that they're community safety related for that December meeting?
I'm working on the basis that it would be fairly difficult for officers to bring forward reports. Sometimes we can push them back, but it's harder for officers to produce a report in time to bring it forward. So I'm not necessarily expecting that would be possible, but we can obviously ask that. And the budget item is the one that goes through in December. So you've agreed that would happen monthly. So you would expect to have something in November and December. I can appreciate there's no obvious solution here. I just wanted to raise to the committee's attention really the situation you are in, and that you have a great number of items. I can continue working with the chairman and the vice chairman outside of the meeting if that's helpful, taking account of the comments made.
Yes, I mean, I can't see that anything can be knocked on the head, as it were. I think we're going to have to go away and have a discussion and come back, report back. So, are you all content? Well, it'll fit nicely with the Police and Crime Commissioner, so it'll... Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, could I just ask where the suggestion of the briefing from the Police and Crime Commission came from?
I think that was a committee suggestion. I can't recall exactly. It's been on your work plan for a while, but I do know that meeting, before it had other items on, was purely designed to be your statutory crime and disorder meeting, which you have to do once a year. That is the Community Safety Partnership annual report. That fulfills that element, and it's also timely to hear from the PCC at that point. And the committee also raised that they wanted to look at Neighbourhood Watch and the mobile CCTV at that point.
One thing we could do is amalgamate a number of these into one item. That doesn't shorten the evening, but it does box it nicely together and could make it quicker.
You're going to end up getting reports from different sets of people, so it's not going to make it any quicker, or it's not going to make it any more fluent in the way it goes.
Councillor Anderson.
I think we just have to leave it in your hands, really. I think
so.
I think you're going to find that really the only solution is going to have to be the additional meetings, whether that's 2 in one day or another one another day. There's not really any way you can get rid of any of these things, and there's not really time.
Well, I have to say I do for once agree with you.
Just for once? Is this the first time? Surely not.
I think so, yeah. Okay, I think you've got to steer that. Yep. Okay, you carry on.
Thank you, Chair. I would also, it is late, so I won't ask you for any detail now, but in terms of those reports that are listed for December,
if you do have any particular areas of information or data sets that you want to see within those reports, particularly the ones that are officer reports that are commissioned by the committee rather than cabinet reports, if you could let us know through Democratic Services by the end of October so that we can forward that on to officers to make sure that the reports meet your expectations, that would be very helpful. And finally, if I could draw your attention to the request for a scrutiny working group, you have a form right at the end of your agenda pack. This is a request for scrutiny on emergency procedures and civic commemorations that was submitted by Councillor Vicky Slade and Councillor Millie Earl. So just to take you through the procedure in terms of considering a working group, you have the form there with the details set out, which hopefully you've already seen. The Constitution also asks you to take account of what resources are available when taking on any new work. So to give you an outline of your resource, you don't currently have any other working groups. You had said that you wanted to do a budget working group, but that's been superseded by your monthly budget meetings. You do have a significant uplift in your meetings, however, so bearing in mind the discussion we've just had, you would need to consider whether you've got sufficient councillor availability to take on a working group at this time, if that is what you want to do. In terms of officer resource, I know that it is stretched to support a working group, but I think between Democratic Services or the service area, some support would be found if that is the wish of the committee to do this working group at this time. So I'd look for your views on whether you want to take that on. I think Councillor Earl might want to give you some background.
Councillor Earl?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this was really, following on from the Queen's death and the mixed reviews, I would say, maybe across some of the ways that our towns and areas celebrated it. I think what it's really about is having that member involvement and ability to feed in about what because we're the community representatives, to feed in about what our areas want to do in terms of a single historical event, which is a coronation, that's the word, next year, which many of us will have never seen. Well, I don't think anyone here would have seen one before. So it's more just around that. I don't know if anyone is interested in doing that. I think it's just something which we need to consider, considering the outcome of the.
Yeah, can I just have a bit of experience? I was actually portfolio holder for emergency planning for a number of years in Bournemouth Council. I think it's the same team. We always used to use the mechanism of audit and governance to look at emergency planning, and would suggest that might be a more correct route to take. I don't know if anybody else disagrees, but deathly silence. Yes, Councillor Evans.
I'm sorry, I don't disagree with that, but I was at the meeting last night with the mayor, charter trustees, and wasn't this brought up about the civic events across the 3 towns? And isn't that in? Well, Councillor Kelsey would probably be better at me than saying it about how they're going to organise the civic duties in the future.
Yeah, that was just for Bournemouth. This is across BCP, remember?
Yes, but they were combining.
Yeah,
what
I think,
all
Chairman,
three
if I
towns
can,
are doing.
I think it's been brought up at Hall Chartered Trustees, and it was brought up last night at Bournemouth Trustees, that we sit down with each other, we redo the matrix for who does what, when, where and how, whether we use a single church, for example, across the conurbation for civic events, and whether, which events are BCP events and which events are local mayoral events. If it's a BCP event, then there has to be room for mayors of the individual towns to be invited along to that as well, to represent their own towns, as well as the whole wider BCP thing. It is something that needs to be looked at, and we did decide last night that we would set up a working group. And I think, with all due respect, and at this moment in time, there is enough going on with this with this group already here, and I think the officers have enough work to do without necessarily doing another one. Could I ask that we maybe have this meeting beforehand, with the Charter Trustees of Bournemouth call, and we also get the Christchurch people involved, so that we can then maybe work out some structure as to where we then want to go, and then maybe we can bring that back to, you know, we can talk with Millie here and see where we go with that. I don't know whether people would see that as a better way forward. We need to get some working in place so that we do all work together. It is BCP, chairman being the head of BCP, we then have the mayors underneath that of the 3 areas, and we need to work together to make sure that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were, and doing the events at the same time for the right reasons.
Couldn't agree more. Anybody else? Yes, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to add a bit of detail to that, I think Councillor Giles is absolutely right. What we said yesterday at the Charter Trustees for Bournemouth was have a joint meeting, start talking about it. Councillor Iyengar has also just sent a note, which one or two councillors may have seen, but it was his comment before he left the meeting, and he was trying to differentiate between emergency planning and big civic commemorative events, and I think that's quite a helpful distinction. So Audit and Governance Committee have the role of overseeing emergency planning arrangements. I think part of the complication of things like Operation London Bridge, which was the emergency planning response to the Queen's death, was then got merged into major national and local commemorative events. And that's part of the challenge for us. So my sense is if we separate out the commemorative events, have that discussion, and then have a look at how that might work, and then have a separate review of emergency planning. I've come to this conclusion because the emergency planning is driven through the LRF framework, through the relationship with the police and the other statutory agencies, and is almost entirely officer driven. Commemorative events are very different and need to be mayoral or chair led. So I think we could differentiate. That might help Councillor Earl and Councillor Slade in getting to the conclusion they want, which is to recognise the value of the local representation through that civic function as well. So that might be a helpful suggestion, actually, to have that meeting and then to gradually try and part the two, and then see if we can deliver the outcomes that you need, but in a slightly easier way.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, very good. Is that everything from you? Yes.
That's everything from you.
Okay, in that case, I'm delighted to close the meeting at